Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last part of reading Gonzalo's book, the latest book, Maddie, Enough of Lies. Hi, Chumba. Thank you so much for joining. I'm well, thank you. How are you? Yeah, I started a bit earlier than I scheduled the live for. Hey, JD, thanks for joining. I'm just going to give you guys a couple of minutes. Hey, Chumba, I'm happy to have you here as well. Hey, Debbie, thanks for joining. It seems that I can't really keep up on the schedule, can I? It's always either I'm later or earlier than I usually set it up for. But I can see that people started joining. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Hi, Peter. Thanks for joining. And thank you. I love having all of you here. Yes, that's true, Chumba. Okay, so I guess we can get started. So let me add this on here. There it is. So we were left off finishing chapter 30, and now we are on to chapter 31. So I'm just going to say before I start reading that we are at page 99 out of 141. And like I said in my last video, this will be the last video of the book. So I'm going to be finishing reading the book tonight. Right, chapter 31st, Sewing Up the Monster. The statements made by Helgi in London on 2nd of February 2018 to the British police were used by the German police and judicial authorities to initiate criminal proceedings against Christian Bruckner. This is a case of RAPE and SA of a child and is the basis of the investigation into the disappearance of Madeleine Mccann. By the way, side note, before I carry on reading, before I forget, it just popped into my mind right now. I was reading a bit earlier an article, a news article. I'm not sure if you guys have seen this article. It seems that they are trying to bring another charge against Christian Bruckner for apparently the RAP of, no, sorry, not the RAP, but the attempted abduction of a 14-year-old girl around 1 month before the disappearance of Madeleine Mccann. So this is what the German investigators are trying to investigate right now. Apparently, according to court documents, he is being investigated for this as well. Now, my question was, as soon as I read that article, so if it is an open investigation into Christian Bruckner, right? Why would they make all of this information public? Because I'm certain that it would damage the case if it's being made public, and if this is an ongoing investigation, which to me doesn't make sense unless they are just trying to keep everything in the media, which I think is the case. Because I think that as part of an investigation, if it is an ongoing investigation, releasing all of this information before the final result of an investigation, it would be detrimental to the future proceedings, legal proceedings. But anyway, yeah, before I get sidetracked too much, I'm just going to carry on reading. But I just wanted to let you know the article that I've read today about Christian Bruckner. Some people consider this child RAPE and SA investigation to be insignificant because it doesn't consider most of the actions carried out by the police in the investigation against Christian Bruckner. in relation to his possible involvement in the disappearance. I do not agree with this opinion. Just look at the propaganda material released by the police involved in June 2020 and see that the propaganda acts are part of the investigation against Christian Bruckner for the crime of RAPE, which occurred on 2nd of September 2005 in Praia da Luz, presenting the suspect as a RAPIST SA of minors, perpetrator of robberies in tourist flats in the Praia da Luz area, even with the tenants inside, has the clear purpose of holding him responsible for the disappearance, creating the false idea that this individual had the means, opportunity, and motivation to kidnap the British girl, abuse her, murder her, dispose of her corpse, and keep some trophy related to the crime. For this construction, in which the bad seams of the investigation are visible, it was necessary to link the suspect to a violent crime that occurred in the area of the disappearance, and even better if he was in Praia da Luz. I think that Goncalo Amaral is right here. It seemed a bit too convenient, didn't it, that they managed to link him to all of these crimes during the investigation of the Madeleine McCann's disappearance. If they thought well, they did better. From the Portuguese authorities, they received an important element for the creation of the monster: the information of an attempted RAPE transformed into a RAPE due to serious errors in police assessment, which occurred in Praia da Luz on 2nd of September 2005. The victim was a 70-year-old woman. I don't know, but it was important to know when, in Portugal, the investigation that led to the identification of this crime was carried out. We seem to be faced with the old question of who hatched it first, the chicken or the egg. In other words, was the crime known to have occurred in 2005 and then Helgi made his statement, or did this statement come before the search for a crime that would fit these same statements? This is a doubt that should be duly clarified by the police authorities involved in the construction of a suspect. As for the investigation that was finally carried out by the Portuguese police, the question is, why was it limited to Praia da Luz? The said witness does not say that the crime took place there, but only mentions a holiday flat, without any other description. At the same time as this crime, there are other RAPEs of people of a similar age, but in places further away from Praia da Luz. There is much to be clarified. By using the comparative method between the statements of Helgi and the case of the aforementioned RAPE in Praia da Luz, which occurred in September 2005, we can see that they are completely different situations. How was it possible that for almost a year someone said that Helgi saw the recordings of this RAPE? This is a lie which has been used frivolously, to say the least, but which appears in the requests for cooperation issued by the German judicial authorities and addressed to the Portuguese judicial authorities. This is not mere deception, but a clear intention not to report the truth. The witness Helgi never saw the RAPE of the elderly American woman. So, if I am to understand this correctly, Goncalo Amaral even doubts that there was a RAPE, and also, as it was mentioned just a bit earlier, I'm going to go back. Over here. From the Portuguese authorities, they received an important element for the creation of the monster: the information of an attempted RAPE transformed into an RAPE due to serious errors in police assessment, which occurred in Praia da Luz on 2nd of September 2005. So Goncalo is saying that these were serious errors in the police assessment because they received information of an attempted RAPE and it wasn't an RAPE. But I haven't read this anywhere. I don't think I've ever read this anywhere. I think that all over the news and in the media in general, it was mentioned that there was RAPE of the woman, and that's why Christian Bruckner is in prison. But, correct me if I'm wrong. Hi, Richie. Thank you so much for joining. Yes, snowy Aberdeen. I know. We had snow here where I live, but it was only for one day. Overnight, really. It was snowing for a night, and that's it. Okay, let me just go back here. I'm going to get sidetracked again, probably. So I was left off at the witness, Helgi, never saw the RAPE of the elderly American woman. Just as bad as knowingly working with a lie, using it and abusing it, the attitude of the whistling in the wind. Is the attitude of the whistling in the wind. Whoever conducted the investigation cannot claim that the crime that occurred in Praia da Luz on 2nd of September 2005 is the one that Helgi claims to have visualized on the tapes stolen from Christian Bruckner's house. The 70-year-old white woman, the victim of the crime, is an American national, so she did not speak English with a British accent, as claimed by Helgi. The crime scene is not a holiday flat, but a house used as a permanent residence. The crime is not registered as RAPE, but as attempted RAPE and robbery. I didn't read this anywhere else. I didn't read this information anywhere else. The Portuguese police could not have whistled in the wind and should have drawn attention to the obvious differences between what Helgi claims to have seen and the crime that took place in Praia da Luz on 2nd of September 2005. This appeared to be a palatable case crime that took place near Praia da Luz, from where 2 years later Madeleine Mccann disappeared. It's a near-perfect crime to help build a suspect, to pursue and keep behind bars. And I might add that they succeeded because Christian Bruckner is still behind bars. And quite honestly, it really worked for them because even if, say, for example, that Christian Bruckner is not guilty and he claims he didn't do it and he's not guilty, they will still keep him in jail. And as long as the investigation is ongoing, he will still be in jail up until God knows when. Because the investigation is ongoing, right? I don't know. I assume, just my opinion. So moving on to the next chapter, chapter number 32, a violent crime in Praia da Luz. The violent crime of 2005, like all those that affect defenseless people and like any other crime that questions sexual self-determination, is a horrendous crime with details of torture and sadomasochism. Out of respect for the victim, I will not mention her name or the place where it took place. When RAPE victims have to be present at the trial hearing of a defendant, when they have to remember what they have been through, they feel violated all over again. I know that the press, based on information from the investigation, has already identified the victim and her house, but attitudes stay with those who take them. On the evening of 2nd of September 2005, the victim was watching and listening to the TV news related to Hurricane Katrina that devastated the United States of America. What happened next was recounted by the police who attended the scene as follows. An individual entered the victim's home through the door that was open, unnoticed by the victim. After hearing a noise, she went to check what was going on and was then attacked from behind by the intruder, who was masked, blindfolded her, gagged and tied her from behind, and took her into the bedroom. In the bedroom, there was an attempted RAPE. According to the victim, she was only penetrated once, and the assailant merely played with her breasts. The victim described the assailant as being between 1.75 and 1.80 meters tall, of medium build, and with his face covered by a black cap. She claims that the individual spoke in Portuguese with a strange accent. After assaulting her, he locked her in the bathroom and took 80 euros, a laptop computer, and the knife with which he threatened her. A lophoscopic inspection was carried out, which was negative, and no traces of the perpetrator were found. The clothes worn by the victims were collected and sent to the forensic science lab for examination, specifically for traces of sperm and hair. It was sent to the forensic science lab. Knit blouse, white, bell dog popper, one pair of jeans, white Zafiri, two white sheets, white women's trousers, white bra, red t-shirt torn. On the night of the incident, the victim was taken to the hospital do Barlavento Algarvio in Portimao, and the gynecologist on duty performed a gynecological examination and concluded that there had been no penetration or because she had no signs suggests of RAPE in the vaginal area, intense vaginal atrophy. It was therefore impossible to collect sperm or other evidence. The medical legal examination carried out on 7th of September 2005 at the Court of Instruction of Portimao found that the victim presented trauma to the left shoulder, trauma to the jaw, linear ecchymosis on both elbows, abrasions on both wrists, yellowish ecchymosis on both breasts, concluding that these injuries had been the result of blunt trauma. So again, if we are to take into account what Goncalo Amaral is saying about this attack, this was, by the description of it, an attempted RAPE, which I'm not even sure that there was an intention of RAPE, or maybe it was just perhaps a way to kind of, how do you call it, to restrain the victim, because maybe the perpetrator didn't expect anybody to be home and he was caught by surprise. And if indeed the perpetrator was Christian Bruckner, there was no sign of RAPE. So I don't know, you guys, what do you think? Hey, Vivian, thank you so much for joining. According to the victim's statements, the next day, as it was hot, she had the door to the dining room, which leads to the backyard of the house, open. When the TV news was over, she went to her office. When she entered the office and before she turned on the light, she was attacked from behind by a man who grabbed her by the hair and neck and pushed her, forcing her up the 5 steps to her bedroom. In the bedroom, the man pushed the victim to the floor and covered her mouth with a piece of red t-shirt, which he tore. She was blindfolded without knowing what kind of cloth or color. Her arms were then tied behind her back with a rope. The assailant then pushed her to the floor and also onto the bed. Her clothes were ripped off. She was wearing a cotton top and the trousers she was wearing were removed. When the assailant ripped off her top, he simultaneously ripped open her bra. She does not remember exactly how the individual removed her trousers and panties, but she was completely naked. The assailant turned on the bedroom light and then hit her with what could be a metal spatula, striking her in the face, breasts, buttocks, and lower abdomen. The assailant remained silent as he acted. He laid her on her back, partially on the bed, with her legs dangling towards the floor, and then in that position, he penetrated her intimate area with his thing. However, the victim believes that the man did not ejaculate as she did not feel any ejaculation. She believes that the man would have a weak erection and that he took more pleasure in sadistically assaulting her than in having sexual intercourse. At a certain point, she doesn't know exactly when, she quickly saw that the assailant had a gray hood covering his entire head with only 2 holes in the eye area so that she could see. She also saw for an instant that the man had a large curved knife, perhaps 30 centimeters long. However, he didn't bother her with the knife. After satisfying her sexual instincts, the man in bad Portuguese asked her for money, saying, "Where money?" The man removed the blindfold from her eyes, the gag from her mouth, and cut the rope binding her arms. At the time, the room was dark, with the lights off, and the man was behind the victim, preventing her from turning her head. She believes that the man was approximately 6 feet tall, but she cannot say exactly because she deduces his height from the way he grabbed her. However, she has no doubt that he was a person with a strong muscular build. She took the man into the kitchen where she had a purse with about 80 or 100 euros in it, which he handed over to him. She also had debit and credit cards in her purse, but the man didn't take them. He then led her to the bathroom next to the room and told her to stay there for about 10 minutes. She stayed inside the bathroom with the door closed but not locked for 5 minutes. In addition to the money, the assailant stole a white Apple iBook Macintosh laptop, valued at 2,000 euros, as well as electrical connection cables. On 5th of December 2005, the victim wrote an email to a friend in which she recounted the crime she had suffered and at one point added something she had not yet described, namely, "Before I blindfolded myself, I quickly caught a glimpse of a hooded figure with dark eyes peering through the cracks." So, okay, this is the victim's statement, and I'm a bit suspicious here because Goncalo Amaral is saying that she was taken to the hospital. RAPE kit was performed, and the doctor found absolutely no trace of any RAPE. So I don't know what's going on. Hey, Julie, thanks for joining. On 11th and 12th of June 2018 in Pasadena, USA, 13 years after the crime, the victim gave a new statement to the German police, which was supported by the FBI. In this new statement, she confirmed the statements made in 2005 to the Portuguese police, being peremptory in stating that she was not blindfolded with swimming goggles and that the crime was not filmed. The German police showed her photographs of Christian Bruckner of a black cap seized during a search of the suspect, as well as a computer of a completely different make and color from the one stolen from the victim. The victim didn't recognize the person, having never seen him, nor the objects. Again, the cap worn by the assailant in 2005 was white or gray. From the victim's statements, it's clear that there are major differences with the statements of Helgi in addition to those already mentioned above. The victim is American. She didn't speak English with a British accent. The place of the crime is not a holiday flat, but a house used as a permanent residence. There is no RAPE, but only attempted RAPE and robbery. Thus, we can summarize. The assailant's mask was not black, nor did it have 2 holes for the eyes and 1 for the mouth. The victim describes it as gray and with only 2 holes for the eyes. Helgi mentions a small leather whip with a wide tip as the object of the assault. The victim mentions something like a metal spatula. The victim was dressed in white and the assailant stripped her completely naked. Helgi mentions that the victim was wearing a flowery top which was pulled up. Helgi states that because of the RAP's movements, he had sexual intercourse with the victim and that at the end, she was exhausted and breathing heavily. The victim mentions only 1 penetration and describes the moment as follows. He put his thing in my thing. She believes that the man would have a weak erection and that he took more pleasure in beating her sadistically than in having sexual intercourse with her. Unlike Helgi, the victim doesn't mention the use of a condom by the assailant, nor that he threw it in the toilet bowl. The victim states that the assailant had dark eyes. Helgi claims that the assailant was Christian Bruckner, but it's a public and notorious fact that the latter has light eyes. The final scene of Christian putting a pillow on the victim's face doesn't exist in the victim's account. Through this comparative analysis between the victims and the Helgi's statements, it's possible to conclude that what Helgi claims to have seen on the tapes stolen from Christian's house does not correspond to the crime the victim suffered on 2nd of September 2005. This fact could not have been unknown to the investigating police authorities, but unbelievably, they continued to act as if this was the same crime. This position of the German police led the German judicial authorities to issue European investigation decisions to the Portuguese judicial authorities based on the statements of Helgi. It's alleged that this individual had visualized the crime suffered by the elderly American victim, which was known to be untrue. The Portuguese judicial authorities took decisions based on European investigative decisions with flawed reasoning, namely sending a certificate of the entire file relating to the 2005 crime, handing over to the German authorities all the material collected at the crime scene, even after it had been sent in time to the Portuguese lab for examination, issuing a search warrant for Helgi's motorhome, which was supposed to be parked at Fazenda Rebelde in Santa Clara. These are just a few more stitches of a poorly conducted investigation, or rather intentionally carried out to construct a PDF kidnapping. So what do you guys think? It's clear from what Goncalo Amaral is saying that, well, we already, what's the word? We already speculated that Christian is the scapegoat, and now we also have the information from Goncalo Amaral about the RAPE that he's in prison for. So yeah, as he says, a poorly conducted investigation, or rather intentionally carried out to construct a PDF kidnapping. So they want to make it look that Christian Bruckner effectively kidnapped Madeleine Mccann with anything they can. And probably if they can't, then they will just come up with something. Or, as I say in a lot of my videos, they will just make the evidence that they have fit their theory, rather than, construct a theory based on the evidence. Right. Chapter 33, Breaking the Chain of Custody of Evidence. At this point, it's necessary to know everything that happened in relation to the chain of custody of the evidence, so it's important to proceed with the chronological sequence of all the facts relating to the material collected from the victim's home in 2005, and at the time sent to the Portuguese lab for examination with the intention of searching for traces of sperm and hair. 1. On 7th of September 2005, the Portimao Criminal Investigation Department sent to the Scientific Police Lab in Lisbon the material to be examined. Bell-dog popper, white knitted blouse, a pair of white jeans Zafiri, 2 white sheets, white women's trousers, white bra, red t-shirt torn. 2. The criminal case was closed on 10th of February 2006, and the final report states that with regard to the information provided by the victim and the evaluation of the material sent for examination, the probability of positive results is quite low. 3. On 12th of September 2005, the Scientific Police Lab confirms receipt of all the material sent for examination and reports that it was forwarded to the Biology Department for evaluation and subsequent dispatch, having been assigned the number 200-514-167-B6. 4. On 28th of November 2009, the Forensic Science Lab, in a letter signed by the then director Carlos Farinha, informed the Lagos Public Prosecutor's Office that it would return the material as the examination was no longer necessary, stating, "We have ascertained through telephone contact that the examination will no longer be necessary. I therefore inform you that on this date, we will proceed to cancel the said examination and return the respective material received for expertise." 5. On 22nd of March 2018, The Lagos prosecutor's office is informed of the need to keep the file and the seized objects. So this is between from 2009 up until 2018, no movement in all those years. And then suddenly in 2018, they are informed that they need to keep the file and the seized objects. On 14th of May 2018, the Braunschweig prosecutor in Germany issues a European investigation decision addressed to the Portuguese authorities requesting copies of the criminal file and the handing over of the seized material, basing the request on the following. Christian B. is being investigated on suspicion of RAPE. He is accused of having RAPE'd an American tourist while in Portugal. On 8th of February 2018, German citizen Helgi stated in the course of his testimony that immediately after the arrest of the suspect on 8th of April 2006 in Portugal, he and the other witness, Manfred, entered the house rented by the suspect in Portugal to search for stolen goods. In addition to other items, he stole numerous videotapes. On two of the stolen videotapes, he saw from different perspectives an alleged RAPE by the accused of an elderly woman in her 70s and 80s who spoke English. According to the witness, the place of the crime was a holiday flat or a hotel room. The victim was tied to a bed, blindfolded. The accused was initially masked with a kind of balaclava, which he removed at the end of the recording, so he was clearly recognized by the witness. On 23rd of May 2018, the competent judicial authority authorizes the referral of the file and the objects to the Northern Directorate of the Judicial Police for subsequent delivery to the German police authorities. On June 7, 2018, the Northern Directorate of the Judicial Police officiates to the Lagos prosecutor's office, informing that the German authorities request a copy of the case file and of the items seized in the framework of the case that have not yet been destroyed. On 8th of June 2018, the Lagos prosecutor office informs that the objects examined are in the evidence room. On 11th of July 2018, the certificate of the trial and the material stored at the Court of Lagos since 2009 is delivered by hand to an inspector of the Judicial Police of the Department of Portimao who traveled there for this purpose. The delivery note reads, cardboard box with 7 envelopes from the Portimao Judicial Police Department with traces and numbered from 1 to 6. On 18th of July 2018, at the premises of the Judicial Police located in Portimao, the material was handed over to elements of the German police, the delivery note stating the following. A cardboard box containing a white knitted blouse of the Beldoc Popper brand with white jeans of the Zafiri brand, 2 white sheets, white women's panties, a white bra, and a red torn t-shirt. On 23rd of July 2018, the material received by hand is 5 days later handed over to the German forensic lab for examination. In a report written by a German police officer, it stated for the first time that the material was packaged in such a way as to protect traces and that the envelopes were not opened. 13. After opening the cardboard box and the envelopes containing the various material, the German forensic lab is confused. On 6th of August 2018, the head of the German forensic lab writes an email stating, "We have already unpacked most of the items and worked on them. It appears that no blouse is included. Instead, a sheet, a second sheet duvet, laken, trousers, a knitted waistcoat, a bra, and a red t-shirt, a panty. What is striking is that the knitted waistcoat and the t-shirt have obviously already been processed. The German lab technician did not expect these items to have been processed by the Portuguese lab. As far as he knew, the test should not have been processed yet, and the Portuguese lab would have just kept all the material in storage, but the processing was obvious. The eyelet was cut on both sides of the waistcoat, the whole right flank, and other areas of the t-shirt. Also on the trousers, there is a small hole in the crotch area which could be damaged or a small cutout area. A certain GS I do not know who the author of the email refers to, reportedly made a statement in which he spoke of a blouse, but it doesn't appear in the material received from Portugal. In this regard, the German lab technician writes, in GS's statement, there was nothing about a red t-shirt, where this t-shirt comes from, and if he possibly wore it during the crime, it would be interesting to test it. In any case, the t-shirt was extensively edited. The technician concludes by suggesting that the Portuguese authorities be questioned about the results of the tests carried out, as well as about the blouse, which according to him was missing. So I don't get it. So there was another German professional who confirmed that they received everything, and now they say that they didn't receive everything. Hey, Susan, thank you for joining. That's okay. You can catch up. The technician concludes by suggesting that the Portuguese authorities, okay, I read that already. 14. Faced with the situation described by the German lab, on 7th of August 2018, the German police decided to contact the Portuguese authorities for clarification, not least because there was no indication of the progress of the tests carried out by the Portuguese lab. For the German police, it was necessary to investigate the missing pieces, the cuttings made by the Portuguese forensic lab, as the fact of separation indicates the presence of human biological traces left by the perpetrator of the crime. The results of this investigation and of the contacts with the Portuguese police and judicial authorities are unknown, or rather, the Portuguese lab processed the evidence and carried out the examination, but there is no report with the conclusions. 15. On 17th of September 2018, the German lab produces a report with the final results. Only on the 2 sheets were traces found that could be examined for DNA, namely 16 human hairs. Of these, DNA profiles could only be identified on 2. One of the hairs belonged to the victim, the other had roots and was identified as belonging to Christian B. 16. In 2005, when the material was sent to the Portuguese lab, the Laboratorio de Policia Científica, 2 white sheets were sent, which were delivered to the BKA element that went to Portimao on the 18th of July 2018. When all the material entered the German lab, there were no longer 2 white sheets, but 1 sheet, a second sheet or duvet. After the German lab report was written, there was another change, this time to 1 white sheet plus a curtain sheet. It may just be a matter of name, but there is a big difference between a sheet, a duvet, and a curtain. Therefore, one cannot rule out any kind of alteration to what was sent to the scientific police lab in 2005, handed over to the German police in 2018, and examined by the German lab in September 2018. Only through the testimony of the members of the judicial police who, in 2005, collected and sent the material for examination can the discrepancy between what was sent to Germany and what entered the German lab and was re-examined be clarified. Further analysis of the chain of custody of the evidence shows that the material sent to the forensic lab on 7th of September 2005 remained there for 4 long years. There are indications that the Portuguese lab had started to process the material received, but didn't complete the required examination, investigation of sperm and hair. For 9 years, the material was stored in the evidence room of the Lagos Magistrates Court. On 11th of July 2018, a cardboard box with 7 envelopes from the Judicial Police of Portimao containing traces and numbered from 1 to 6 was hand-delivered to an inspector of the Judicial Police of Portimao. The delivery deadline doesn't indicate whether the contents of the cardboard box as well as the envelopes were confirmed, for example, whether they were opened. From the judicial court in Lagos, the cardboard box with its contents was transported to the department of the judicial police in Portimao. There is no information as to where it was kept, whether in the vault, which required the completion of a deposit slip, or whether it simply remained in the room of the brigade in charge of executing the European investigation order. 7 days later, the cardboard box with its contents was hand-delivered to the German police officers who came to Portimao. It's not known whether the box was opened, but the delivery note is peremptory. Contains, which means that there is no doubt about its contents, otherwise one would say will contain or is said to contain. We discussed the chain of custody of the evidence and chronologized the facts and events from the time it was sent to the scientific police lab in Lisbon on September the 7th, 2005, until it entered the German lab on 23rd of July 2018. 13 years was the time elapsed between the collection of evidence at the crime scene and the completion of an examination in a foreign lab. Once again, Portugal abdicated its jurisdiction and its duty to ascertain the material truth and allowed others to do its work. The discovery of a hair with roots belonging to suspect Christian B. in one of the sheets of the victim's bed is strange, to say the least. And we ask again, how and on what date did the RAP in Praia da Luz on 2nd of September 2005 come about? Was it before or after Helgi's statement? This question is not unimportant, as Helgi never spoke about this case, but about another one. On the other hand, the victim's description of the crime, namely that the perpetrator had dark eyes, ruled out the perpetration of the crime by Christian Bruckner. He has light eyes. The victim stated that the assailant spoke in bad Portuguese and said, "Where is the money?" He spoke in bad Portuguese and not in Portuguese with a strong foreign accent, as stated in some documents of the German judicial authorities. Speaking badly is different from speaking with an accent. From what Helgi claims to have seen, one can conclude that there are some similarities with the crime of 2nd of September 2005 in Praia da Luz. I wonder where the German authorities' conviction of the perpetrators of this crime comes from. Was it only the similarities between what Helgi claimed to have seen, or the physical proximity of the crime scene in 2005 and the Ocean Club flat? The victims are completely different. In the first case, a woman in her 70s, in the second, a girl of only 3 years old. Throughout the analysis of the German police and judicial investigation, it's notorious the will to link Christian Bruckner with the crime of Praia da Luz, revealing testimonies with little credibility, carrying out evidentiary diligences, trying to build a profile of a sadomasochist, mistreater and abuser of minors, torturer and murderer of children, but leaving relevant diligences that would put in doubt the main statement, the one that the self-styled petty criminal gave in February 2018 to the Metropolitan Police. This way of acting by the German police is clearly biased, with a lack of objectivity that should guide any criminal investigation. Hey Bernadette, thank you so much for joining. Chapter 34, Incomplete or Manipulated Investigations. In an attempt to find answers to our doubts, let us analyze what was done and, above all, what was not done in the German investigation, as well as the motivation behind certain decisions. As we have already seen, the suspect's criminal record serves and has served to build up the suspect's profile. It was necessary to listen to friends and acquaintances from the time he lived in Portugal and Germany to know his lifestyle, his sexual practices, which were relevant for him to be considered a torturer and sadomasochist, to know which vehicles he used over the years, and to place him in the area of the crimes. For example, to consider that living nearby, this was in itself an indication of his possible involvement. The various girlfriends were not forgotten, but in general, they didn't contribute anything relevant. The German girlfriend who traveled with him to Portugal in 1995, Silke B., and who lived here until December 2000, provided photographs of the suspect's house and cars. Most of them were exposed by the press during the propaganda campaign in the summer of the pandemic year 2020. Another girlfriend from a few years ago reported that during an altercation between her and Christian in 2013, he was aggressive towards her, pinned her against a ladder, punched her hard in the chest, and penetrated her backside with a vodka bottle. The suspect was neither tried nor convicted for such acts, and only here the German police found sadomasochistic tendencies, concluding that there were similarities with the 2005 crime. From what friends and acquaintances say, mainly those who are close to Christian Bruckner during the time he lived in Portugal, it's suspected that he earned his living by robbing hotel units and holiday flats. One of the most important testimony is that of a German street musician who met Christian B. in Lagos in 2004. This person, called Christian P., described the suspect as someone who liked to show off, always dressed in an overcoat, and who drove a big car. For Christian P., the suspect's money must not have come from legal sources, as he did not have a regular job. According to this witness, on one of the several times he visited Christian Bruckner at his home, he saw a pile of red passports. When Christian Bruckner was questioned about the origin of the passports, he told him that they had been stolen nearby and that he used to steal from hotels by, in Christian Bruckner's words, climbing up the facades. The witness further stated that Christian Bruckner never spoke to him about the use of violence, nor did he give him details about the victims or the locations of the robberies. For this witness, Christian B. only had a stationary computer and a laptop, and he never saw a barrel with fuel and parts of a solar panel. Christian Bruckner would like pornography, which he got from the internet, the witness having seen 100 CDs with such content. The actors in these films spoke Brazilian. Faced with a description of the pornographic content, the police asked him a direct question. In the films with animals, did you see Christian Bruckner's dog? The witness answered in the negative. The witness also clarified that he had not seen swimming goggles with gray tinted lenses, masks, mountain passes, or sex toys. At the end of 2005, he bought a gray Dell laptop from Christian Bruckner for 200 euros, which allegedly came from a robbery. In 2006, immediately after Christian Bruckner's arrest, she visited him in Portimao prison, where she asked him to bring her vodka inside oranges and to go to her house to pick up some things, namely clothing and personal belongings. He went to Christian Bruckner's house, and there he met his girlfriend Marina. In the house, he found what Christian Bruckner had asked for and noticed again the CDs with porn content, so he picked out the ones with the worst titles and threw them in the trash on his way back. Christian Bruckner's girlfriend saw the witness throw the CDs in the trash and reportedly told her boyfriend because when she tried to visit him again in prison, she was prevented by the prisoner's wishes. This testimony is important to analyze the intentions of the German police and judicial authorities towards the suspect. For them, the part in which the witness states Christian B's possible criminal life, the practice of robberies in hotel units, was relevant. The part of the testimony concerning the CDs with porn content was of initial interest, but the fact that Christian Bruckner's dog was not used in acts of zoophilia destroyed this initial interest. This testimony calls into question the testimony of the witness Helgi, when he states that sometime after Christian Bruckner's arrest, he and Manfred decided to enter his house and that he found in the wardrobe 2 video cameras and cassettes containing recordings of RAPE and SA. Witness Christian P. testifies that immediately after the arrest of Christian Bruckner, at his request, he went to his home. The times of the 2 trips to Christian Bruckner's house are different, and one appears to be more contemporaneous with the arrest than the other. The phrase immediately after the arrest seems to mean an earlier action than sometime after, the person saying this will have performed a later action. It's perfectly normal and acceptable to conclude that Christian P. went to the prisoner's house before he was robbed by the witnesses Helgi and Manfred, if only because at the time Christian P. was a friend who lived nearby while the alleged robbers lived in Orgiva, with occasional trips to the area of Santa Clara in the interior of the Algarve Mountains, far from Portimao. These sentences should not be ignored. Note that in the grounds of the European investigation order sent to the Portuguese judicial authorities, the German judicial authorities insist on writing that witnesses Helgi and Manfred committed a burglary in the suspect's house immediately after the arrest of the suspect, which is to say the least a mistake because the burglary occurred sometime after the arrest of the suspect, according to what witness Helgi said. Ask yourself why this mistake. Let us look again at what the witness Christian P. said. He went to the detainee's house to collect clothes and personal belongings. To find and collect the clothes, he had to search the wardrobe, where Helgi claims to have found the 2 video cameras and the cassettes, and to have seen the swimming goggles painted gray. The witness is clear. He didn't see any video cameras or swimming goggles in gray. What he saw and threw away a part of it were CDs with porn content taken from the internet, so he didn't see any tapes with sexual content either. The mistake of the German judicial authorities does not seem to be harmless. It has to be considered that Helgi and Manfred were the first to go to Christian's house, even before anyone else. Only then does the theft of the videotapes with porn scenes, or in the opinion of the prosecution, films of acts of rape committed by the suspect, lend credibility. And what happened to the girlfriend Marina, who was living in the house at the time of Christian's arrest and at the time of Christian P's visit, and who was no longer living there when Helgi and Manfred entered the house? When did she stop living in the house? The answers to these questions are not to be found in the investigation of Christian Bruckner for RAPE and SA, which is another strange flaw in the investigation. So basically, they only investigated what was of interest to them in the sense of showing that Christian Bruckner did the things that they accuse him basically of doing. Anything else was completely ignored. So long story short, whatever didn't fit their theory was just ignored. When in doubt as to, did I read this? No. When in doubt as to who first gained access to Christian's house after his arrest, it would be incumbent upon any diligent police investigator to gather evidence. Such evidence would be easy to gather simply by consulting Christian Bruckner's visiting records in Portimao prison and confirming the date on which Christian P., his friend, visited him. From there, it was only necessary to find out where Helgi and Manfred were physically present at that time, in Orgiva or in Santa Clara. None of this was done, allowing the Portuguese judicial authorities to be misled with the phrase shortly after the arrest of the suspect, leaving no room to question the date on which the robbery took place or even whether it really happened. The closest the German police come to establishing the date on which Christian P. went to Christian B.'s house at the latter's request after his arrest in 2006 is the conclusion they draw from his statements about the presence of cars at the scene. As he didn't see the Jaguar, he went to the house after being picked up by the detainee's mechanic friend, but no date is given for this moment. The date of Christian P.'s visit to the prisoner's house doesn't seem to be of interest to the German police, and there can be only one reason for this. Confirmation of a date prior to the robbery possibly committed by Helgi and Manfred would cast doubt on the statements of these alleged witnesses. The investigation is still very badly mounted. Bernadette is saying, I think if Christian Bruckner had of taken Maddie, he for sure would have left some sort of evidence. Yes, I agree with you. I do agree with you, because if, they found evidence of robberies, so he must have left something if it would have been him. Julie is saying, Christian Bruckner is just being used as a patsy, orchestrated distraction. Yeah, I agree with you, and I think all of us do. Chapter 35, Searches, Seizures, and Examinations. Prior to the January 2016 discovery, on 2nd of July 2014, in the course of an investigation for possession and distribution of child PORN, several data carriers, images, and videos were found and seized during a house search in Braunschweig, Germany. On 8th of June 2016, Christian Bruckner was the subject of an arrest warrant and his whereabouts are unknown. In early 2016, a significant find was made at Christian B's property, located on the premises of a former box factory in the city which I can't pronounce the name of, in Germany, in the suspect's possession since 2008, which was the subject of several searches in the suspect's absence. Approximately 1 month after the discovery, on 23rd of February 2016, the Neugersleben whatever property was searched again in the absence of the suspect. As part of that search, a number of items of clothing, mainly children's swimming costumes and toys, as well as data carriers, mobile phones, a woolen ski pass with the eye area cut out in black, and the green Toshiba personal computer were found in a motorhome and seized. For the police, this property was evidence especially visible because the accused has no children and has repeatedly committing child attack offenses. Note the focus on child attack offenses, drawing attention to a repeated practice over time. However, this is not exactly what Christian Bruckner's criminal record says about the known cases. It's not possible to conclude that he has repeatedly committed child attack offenses. It's interesting to note that at some point, the court decided to hand over the garments to Christian Bruckner, but he was not interested in receiving them back, nor did he object to their destruction. Despite the court's intention to destroy the seized clothes because they had no evidentiary value, this never happened. According to the German police, Christian Bruckner had told one of his several girlfriends that he had bought the children's clothes on the internet, perhaps because of his lack of interest and contempt for them. At that time, the clothes were not examined with molecular technology, which only happened in the course of the investigation into suspect Christian Bruckner. The police referred to the police lab what they claimed were appropriate tests for molecular genetic examination of the relevant traces in order to find human biological traces of the victims. In other words, they assumed that they were dealing with the victim's clothing, finding no other explanation for its possession by Christian Bruckner. On 12th of July 2018, the result of the lab examination became known. For the police, in view of the result of that examination, the evidence couldn't be ruled out as being the main cause of the traces, as well as contributing to the traces of some evidence. 3 DNA profiles of an unknown female and 1 DNA profile of an unknown male were found on these garments. On 2 children's swimming costumes, size 140, in the crotch area, the DNA profile of Christian B was detected, which is considered by the police as surprising. Against this background, the police concluded that Christian B had intense physical contact. It should be noted that the biological origin of the sample, whether it came from saliva, sweat, blood, or sperm was not identified. So this police conclusion, together with the conclusion that the possible children wearing the clothes were victims of a crime, seems a bit abusive. The profiles obtained were compared with the DNA analysis file and the file of missing and unknown deaths, but this comparison proved negative, so it's presumed that the police also compared these profiles with Madeleine Mccann's and couldn't establish any connection with this child. This presumption is not disproportionate. Let us not forget that the ultimate aim of Operation Recon is to establish a direct link between the suspect Christian Bruckner and the disappearance that occurred on 3rd of May 2007 in Praia da Luz. In this search on 23rd of February 2016, a smartphone belonging to a British national, which had been stolen from inside his holiday home in Carvoeiro, a few kilometers from Praia da Luz, on 22nd of August 2007, was also found and seized. For the German police, this seizure proves that Christian Bruckner was involved in the theft of holiday flats. If the seizure serves to draw this conclusion, then it also proves that Christian Bruckner, after the disappearance of Madeleine Mccann, remained in the Algarve. Also, in the course of this 2016 search, 2 text files were found on one of the data carriers, which were saved as Das Buch and Das Buch 1. For the German police, these files show autobiographical traces of Christian Bruckner. The text files speak of a plan to blackmail petrol stations belonging to the BP group, considered by the German police to be pure fantasy of the author. In this text, Christian Bruckner writes that his house in the Algarve was robbed by persons he doesn't identify. The property was emptied by friends while he was in prison. It should be noted that Christian's statements that his house was burgled while he was in prison were known to the German police and judicial authorities since 2011, since he testified in criminal proceedings for drug trafficking long before the confessions made by Helgi and Manfred in 2018. Moreover, in these text files, Christian Bruckner also, according to the German police, writes that he financed his lifestyle through the illegal trade in hashish, which he regularly bought in Spain and resold in Portugal, as well as by committing various robberies. For the German police, the text files attributed to Christian Bruckner also describe serious sexual crimes and murders, but in these cases they don't consider them to be fantasies, but crimes actually committed by the suspect. So they just pick and choose, again, whatever it suits and it fits them, right? It should be noted that the main crime of which he is accused, the abduction, attack, murder, and concealment of the body of Madeleine Mccann, is not to be found in such a collection of creative writing. Although there is no reference to the missing child in those files, the idea is left that this will be the big proof that the child was abducted and murdered, perhaps because they have read the description of some similar case, as if that was the modus operandi of the suspect. Because apart from this and the testimony of the criminal Helgi, there seems to be nothing else, no scientific or even circumstantial evidence. From 19 to 21st of June 2018, the police carried out another search of the site, this time in order to locate and seize the following: swimming goggles painted gray, data carriers, personal computers, video recordings, children's clothing, written records of acts performed, human biological traces. The site, over 30,000 square meters in size, appeared to have been cleaned, especially when compared to the time of the search on 23rd of February 2016, in the framework of a criminal investigation for alleged distribution, acquisition, and possession of child movies. This search was intended to build on Helgi's statements and gather evidence of child SA as an input into the construction of Madeleine Mccann suspect. They considered identifying the child through clothing seized in 2016. For the police, Christian Bruckner could have filmed or photographed them, and with a bit of luck, they could find something linking the suspect to the disappearance that occurred in Praia da Luz. The June 2018 search was based on the fact that the facts partially proved that Christian B didn't destroy objects or materials related to the crimes committed in Portugal, but kept them hidden in his property. Despite this conviction by the German police, nothing was found to link him to the attempted RAPE and robbery on 2nd of September 2005 in Praia da Luz, and especially to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Several of the vehicles that, as of 2016, were still on the property had since been sold to scrapyards in the area. Once the scrapyards were located, the fate of two Jaguar vehicles that the suspect had used in Portugal could be traced. One had been scrapped and the other was in the possession of the new owner. The surviving Jaguar was examined and subjected to molecular genetic analysis for human biological traces of the victims. These searches were negative and could not confirm the presence of human blood or establish any DNA profile. The only thing found inside the Jaguar vehicle was a Valle do Lobo tourist card issued in the name of a British national valid until 5th of September 2007, which was supposed to be stuck between the center console and the passenger seat. The British national was allegedly on holiday in Valle do Lobo, more than 80 kilometers from Praia da Luz, at the beginning of September 2007. According to the headline, one evening when he was having dinner with 6 or 8 people on the porch of the house, he was robbed by someone who broke into the house, taking 200 euros and some change, as well as his passport and jewelry. The German police attribute the robbery to suspect Christian Bruckner, although they found only a resort card and used this as evidence that he is a thief who has no problem breaking into houses with people inside, as he would have done in the crime of 2nd of September 2005 in Praia da Luz. This conclusion of the German police is interesting, and if he can define a modus operandi, it's not unreasonable to conclude that Christian Bruckner did not leave the Algarve or Portugal immediately after the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, since it's proven that at the beginning of September 2007, he was still in the Algarve. If the Valle do Lobo resort card serves to accuse Christian Bruckner of the theft in September 2007, it should also serve to confirm his presence in the Algarve beyond 3rd of May 2007, being able to prove only with the help of the testimony of a girlfriend that on 17th of September of that year, the suspect was in Germany. We would like to draw your attention to the fact in the news spread from the summer of 2020, it was stated that Christian Bruckner had left Portugal immediately after the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, which doesn't appear to be true. All the data media seized and the chat conversation that took place in 2013 made it possible to establish that the Money Times 7 email account used by the suspect Christian Bruckner was created on 2nd of January 2007, which is why, through Microsoft, they wished to seize the content of this email box. The search and seizure was carried out without the presence of the suspect. The material collected is likely to be manipulated, but the analysis carried out didn't find anything that directly or even indirectly links the suspect to the 2007 crime in Praia da Luz. Despite this fact, during the propaganda campaign carried out by the consortium Grange, Rechen and Associados, the German prosecutor went so far as to suggest that he had seen the death of the missing child. To have seen what he suggested only if, in the midst of the seized computer and image material, there was a recording which, as has been said, did not exist at the time of the searches nor in the subsequent analysis. Hey Sally, thank you so much for joining. Sally is saying, I don't think that Christian Bruckner took Maddie. He told his maid that she wouldn't have screamed if she'd been taken. Maddie was a screamer. She was screaming for an hour and a half the previous night. Oh, yes, definitely. I agree with you on that. And just imagine a child being taken by a stranger. Wouldn't they scream or cry or, make some kind of noise because they find themselves suddenly in the arms of a stranger? And Maddie, as far as we know, like you said, she was a screamer, so she wouldn't have been quiet. Even her parents refer to Mccann levels of noise. Yes, exactly. Hey, Kel, thank you so much for joining. Yeah, you can watch later, you can catch up, and you can catch up on the other parts as well if you haven't watched them already. Oh, let me have some water. Okay, so Chapter 36, The Assessment for the Prosecution, The Shocking Error. In January 2019, the German police carried out an assessment of the investigation carried out up to that point in order to produce an indictment. For a better understanding of this assessment, it is necessary to take into account what was already known to the police and judicial authorities and eventually to the Operation Reckon. Before the statement of the main witness, the German Helgi, the suspect Christian Bruckner has a record of child SA, possession and distribution of child movies prior to 2018. In 2006, in the town of Portimao, he was arrested for fuel theft. He's a person familiar with the use and handling of firearms. The Jaguar and the other cars were registered and insured in Germany, where the suspect was even convicted for driving with expired liability insurance. The accident in Orgivan in 2008 between a motorhome driven by the suspect Christian B and another vehicle was reported at the time to the German insurance company. In 2010, the suspect was identified as a trafficker of hashish, both in Spain and resold in Germany. Christian B's statements about the burglary of his house in the Algarve had been known since 2011 when he was in prison in Portimao prison. Since 2013, a manifestation of violent sexual behavior by Christian Bruckner was known. A girlfriend accused him of putting a bottle of vodka in her backside and hitting her breast several times with his hands. In 2014, Christian Bruckner was found to have had a PDF chatroom conversation, which took place in 2013, in which he expressed his desires to have sex with children, torture and murder them, and document his actions in a film. In 2016, German police and judicial authorities became aware that the suspect was producing child movie images. Since 2016, German police and judicial authorities have been aware of the content of the text files Das Buch and Das Buch 1. At least since 2016, they have also been aware of the content of the images and videos contained in the various data carriers seized from the suspect. The assessment of the investigation focuses on what they claim are parallels between the statements of Helgi and Manfred, their alleged credible witnesses, and the crime that occurred in Praia da Luz on 2nd of September 2005. Given that this crime was not witnessed by either of these witnesses, despite the fact that, as mentioned above, Helgi's statement served as the basis for the various European investigation decisions addressed to the Portuguese judicial authorities and did not refer to the 2005 crime, faint parallels are drawn. The German authorities conclude that the use of a ruler and or a broad-tipped whip as a means of assaulting the breasts of the victims parallels the use of a spatula-like object in the 2005 crime. In other words, this is a modus operandi of suspect Christian Bruckner. I do not understand how in this assessment it can be stated, for example, that the victim's house was located on the road to Praia da Luz beach and that Christian Bruckner passed by there on his way to the beach, because nowhere in the investigation is there any evidence or even mere indications that the suspect frequented that beach. Also worrying is the frivolity with which the suspect seems to be blamed for several robberies in the Praia da Luz area. In order to try to identify the perpetrator of the 2005 crime, the judicial police proceeded to analyze all the information related to the robberies that occurred at that time in that area. Some of them were committed by breaking and entering, unlike this crime in which the perpetrator seems to have taken advantage of an open door to enter the house. This analysis revealed nothing that could lead to the perpetrator of the crime. However, 13 years later and thousands of kilometers away, the German police stated that there was a striking parallel. There were evidently several unexplained burglaries in the area, and left in the air the suspicion that such burglaries had been committed by Christian Bruckner, because he lived near Praia da Luz and was familiar with the practice of burglary. If they come to this conclusion, they should take over the investigation of these burglary offenses, even though they are probably all-time barred. They cannot consider themselves competent only for what they are interested in. These suspicions, based solely on the fact that someone lived in the area of the crime and someone else said they made a living from the burglary, are flimsy to say the least. It may cast doubt on some innocent people who live in the area. The German police ridicule the work of the criminal police and the medical legal experts. Even those who collaborate in the construction of the perfect suspect do not escape ridicule. In several documents and also in this final statement, the German police claim that the Portuguese police considered the victim of the 2005 crime to be already dead, but that they managed 13 years later was said to be alive. Another frivolous criticism of the Portuguese contained in this final assessment refers to what was written by the member of the Criminal Investigation Police who went to the crime scene in 2005. He only penetrated her once and played with her breasts. The German police considered this description at least derogatory if we look at the photo of the victim and the subsequent statements. Here, the German police walk completely in the dark, unwilling to accept reality. What is in question is the result of the gynecological examination carried out by a specialist gynecologist at the hospital do Barlavento Algarvio in Portimao in the early hours of 3rd of September 2005, and what this doctor and the victim herself brought to the attention of the Portuguese police. In our opinion, the German police and judicial authorities made a serious error in the analysis of the evidence and in the legal qualification of the types of crime in question. Let us start by looking at what was actually written by the member of the judicial police who went to the crime scene and to the hospital. The victim described what happened and said that she was only penetrated once and the assailant simply played with her breasts. The German police blindly overlooked the fact that the word played was in quotation marks with a metaphorical meaning, and especially given that what was written is what the victim said in the first approach. To say that this phrase is derogatory is, to say the least, disrespectful to the work carried out by the judicial police. In addition to the fact that on the night of the crime, members of the judicial police spoke to the victim to understand what happened, they also took her to the hospital for a gynecological examination in order to determine whether the rape had taken place and whether it was possible to collect biological traces, specifically sperm. After this examination, the specialist doctor informed the judicial police that there had been no penetration, so it was impossible to collect semen or other means of evidence. According to the result of the gynecological examination, we are dealing with an attempted RAPE. This is how the investigation was recorded. The Portuguese prosecutor never changed this legal qualification. On 7th of September 2005, at the medical legal office in Portimao, the victim underwent a physical examination to assess the various injuries she had sustained. This was an external examination and not a gynecological examination, which at the time had already been carried out. The report of this examination refers to the clinical documentation provided to them from the hospital Barlavento Algarvio, Portimao, dated 3rd of September 2005, which states vaginal introitus with no sign of lacerations, intense vaginal atrophy. Note that they didn't write down the entire content of the result of the gynecological examination, but only part of it. We are faced with two completely different and complementary clinical and expert examinations. The first, carried out in the early hours of 3rd of September 2005 at Portimao Hospital, was to determine whether RAPE had taken place and to collect any sperm. The second was carried out 5 days later to assess the external injuries suffered by the victim. Regarding the first examination, the gynecological examination, the German police begin by stating that the aforementioned examination by the doctor of the Hospital do Barlavento does not show that there was no penetration, but that there was vaginal penetration without marks of wounds. Once again, the German police questioned the work of the Portuguese police. In this respect, the assessments information provided by the officer who received the complaint are partly incomprehensible. This is a big lie, not just a mistake. This is not an opinion or interpretation, but a real failure to read the result of the gynecological examination. It is a chilling situation that has led to erroneous conclusions, to an accusation based on an error, and to a conviction for a crime that didn't exist. Note the difference between what is written in the report of the Medical Legal Cabinet and the clinical information of 3rd of September 2005. Vaginal introitus without signs of lacerations, intense vaginal atrophy. Now let's look at what the German police say in the same report. Vaginal penetration without injury marks. The differences are obvious, and it's not innocent to say that there was vaginal penetration when this is not written in any of the examinations carried out. It could be a translation error. The Portuguese process was translated into German, but the difference is abysmal. Nowhere is there any mention of vaginal penetration or wound marks. Let us return to the gynecological examination carried out in the early morning of 3rd of September by a gynecologist. His result is clear. There was no penetration. The rape was not consummated. Based on the result of this examination, it's difficult for anyone to be tried or convicted for rape, even with the victim's statements that there was vaginal penetration. Namely, the penis penetrated the declarant's vagina. However, the declarant thinks that the man did not ejaculate, and she didn't feel any ejaculation. She thinks that the man would have a weak erection. She thinks that the man felt more pleasure in assaulting her in a sadistic way than in having sexual intercourse. It's incomprehensible, or perhaps not, why the German police ignored the gynecological examination. One of the reasons may be that the translator could not read the result of the examination because it was considered illegible. Even if it was considered illegible, the police should have been diligent, not confusing this examination with the one carried out at the Medical Legal Office on 7th of September 2005, nor lying about the results and the true content of the medical record. The analysis carried out by the German police is an error caused by lack of care and diligence in the reading, or lack thereof, of the examinations carried out at the Hospital do Barlavento Algarvio and at the Medical Legal Office, a detrimental failure that had serious consequences. With the difficulties demonstrated in reading documents written in Portuguese, the German police will have great difficulty in understanding the full content of the Portuguese investigation into the disappearance of Madeleine Mccann, limiting themselves to listening to meaningless interpretations, mainly of the elements that make up the British operation called Grange. Let us return to the diligent attitude that was and is necessary. In such a situation where scientific evidence resulting from an examination carried out by a qualified technician, in this case a doctor specializing in gynecology, is at stake, the German police would have had to find other solutions to read and understand the content of the results of the gynecological examination. I am sure that if they had spoken to the Portuguese colleagues, with whom they collaborated and collaborate in the construction of a suspect, they would have been informed. They preferred to consider the work of the judicial police in that particular case, as well as the opinion of the gynecologist and the forensic expert, as contemptuous and incomprehensible. One has to be very sure of what one reads to draw such offensive conclusions. The consequences of this conduct by the German police are serious. The suspect went to trial and was convicted of attempting RAPE, whereas what we may be dealing with is attempted RAPE. The difference between the completed crime and the attempted crime is achieved through the measure of punishment, which is particularly attenuated for the former. The crime of 2nd of September 2005, which occurred in Praia da Luz, is only registered as a robbery. The Portuguese prosecutor's office has set aside the suspicion of an attempted RAPE. On the other hand, the attitude of the German police will not have allowed the court of first instance, nor the suspect's defense, to appreciate and question the evidence resulting from the examination, namely through the testimony of the gynecologist who carried it out. In such a situation, perhaps the suspect's hair found in Germany in one of the victim's probable bed sheets from Portugal would not have had the relevance and consequences that it did. Another example of obscurity in the German investigation, and one that can be easily arrived at from reading the final assessment made in January 2019, concerns a document accepted as being of interest to the rape investigation, namely an email sent by the victim to a friend in December 2005. In this email, the German police emphasized that the victim describes the crime she suffered in the same way as she did to the criminal investigation police, considering that the modus operandi, the way she was grabbed, thrown, tied, and gagged by the masked assailant, as well as the blows with a kind of spatula on the breasts and other parts of the body, which apparently sexually aroused the assailant, constitute a parallelism. For the police, there are clear parallels with the video sequences described by the witnesses Helgi and Manfred, which show Christian Bruckner acting in the same way, masked, tying up the victim, beating with a percussion instrument on the breasts, and RAPING. I don't know why I'm spelling it, because I kept on reading it fully, so if they can draw these parallels from the content of the victim's email, they forget to talk about something else. The color of the assailant's eyes. The victim clearly writes that she could see the aggressor's eyes. This is what is clear from the sentence. Hooded figure, dark eyes peeping. For the victim, the assailant had dark eyes, but the German police seem to have forgotten this detail. Their main suspect has light eyes, which is totally different from what the victim claims to have seen. So it was not appropriate to highlight this part of the email. Witness or victim statements have been subjected to an almost inquisitorial criterion. Only what is relevant to accuse is used as evidence, leaving hidden everything that in some way would cast doubt on the conviction, interests, and motivations of those investigating and accusing. In this regard, after discussing the assessment carried out by the German police in January 2019, we will proceed to list the acts of investigation that have not been carried out. This is not just the opinion of a criminal investigator, but a careful examination of the circumstances in which the investigation took place and the testimonies of alleged credible witnesses. According to the German police, on 26th of November 2013, the suspect Christian B. broke into the flat of one of her friends, pinned her against a staircase, and pushed a bottle of vodka into her behind while hitting her breast with his hand several times. These events gave rise to a criminal case which was eventually closed. The parallel that, according to the police, exists with the 2005 crime in Praia da Luz is described as follows. Clear parallels can be observed in the sexual behavior of Christian B. While in the case of the 2005 crime, he used strong physical violence after restraint to keep the victim under control, in the case of his girlfriend, he pinned her down on the stairs to make her obey him. It is particularly notable that Christian Bruckner then hit her several times on the breasts, in this case with his hands. Bruises are bruises, but the police managed to draw another parallel between the two crimes. The bruises on the breasts of the girlfriend are clearly recognizable and similar to those of the victim from 2005. This, despite the fact that the means of aggression used are different, in one case the hands themselves, in the other a spatula-like object. I am not a forensic expert, but the marks, bruises of an assault, in case different objects were used, are not similar, they are different. The German police seem to want to emphasize the result of the assault in both cases, the extensive bruising, but it's not possible to draw any evidentiary parallels from this. Another parallel detected by the German police concerns the criminal record of the suspect Christian Bruckner, recovering the offense of production of child movies perpetrated on 16th of June 2013 in Germany, to consider that since his first conviction, this case is proof that Christian Bruckner, after his first relevant conviction in March 1995 for essay of a child, has also recently committed offenses with a sexual background. Only 18 years after the first conviction for essay of a child, the alleged PDF is again prevaricating according to police knowledge. Let us remind ourselves of the case in question. On the aforementioned date, Christian Bruckner produced sensual photographs of a 4-year-old girl, daughter of a friend. The photographs were found on a digital camera during the discovery in January 2016 next to the body of Christian Bruckner's dog. These photographs were taken a few months after Christian Bruckner had a chat conversation with another PDF in which he expressed his desire to have sex with a girl, torture her, murder her, and hide the body while producing a film. But as this case shows, none of this happened. His ignoble and sick desires didn't come true. The German police could have withdrawn that interference. Despite having expressed these desires, the suspect Christian Bruckner did not have sexual intercourse with the child, nor did he torture her, murder her, hide her body, or film these acts, but merely produced sensual, allegedly indecent photos of a 4-year-old girl, which is no small thing, but is entirely different. The deduction made by the German police was different. They preferred to use the case as evidence that Christian Bruckner sexually attacks children, adding to this analysis the circumstances in which he was arrested in São Bartolomeu de Messines in the Algarve when he was identified for urinating or exposing himself together with children at the end of a night of partying with a lot of beer. It should be noted that the São Bartolomeu de Messines case was closed, but the German judicial authorities want to reinvestigate the case, which in fact demonstrates the lack of common sense of the Portuguese justice system. This is a dangerous diversion of its jurisdiction. Potential Portuguese victims are at stake, so by allowing alleged crimes committed in Portugal, even against Portuguese citizens, to be investigated by the Germans, the Portuguese justice system is weakening itself and relinquishing its role. It's striking that, according to the German police, they did not learn of this situation, which occurred on 11th of June 2017, from the BKA liaison officer in Lisbon until 13th of December 2018, when he informed them of what had happened. It's known that the liaison officer maintained and continues to maintain contacts with the leadership of the judicial police and elements of this police force involved in the investigation into the disappearance of Madeleine Mccann. Despite the cooperation that exists between the judicial police and the German police, the information didn't pass directly between the cooperators, but traveled indirectly through the liaison officer. This is very strange, to say the least. What is at stake are only the crimes in which Christian Bruckner could be considered a suspect, because if the German police and judicial authorities were strict, there would be many more crimes committed by German citizens in Portugal. Within the supposed strictness of the Germans and their willingness to judge criminals, the BKA liaison officer could and should initiate an inquiry into all crimes in which German citizens are suspected. It's known that the liaison officer was and is in contact with the judicial police and members of the judicial police involved in the investigation into the disappearance of Madeleine Mccann. Despite the cooperation that exists between the judicial police and the German police, the information I think that, yeah, this is repeating itself. Yeah. The starting point for this list could begin with the mysterious death of a newborn German child in the hills of the Algarve in the mid 1980s. Here's a hint: talk to the BK's first liaison officer in Lisbon, an excellent professional with whom I had the pleasure of working, and he may be able to identify the child and the parents. None of this seems to interest the German police. There is a clear persecution of Christian Bruckner, perhaps justified but very exaggerated. From parallel to parallel, we come to the last. Christian Bruckner's knowledge to use and handle firearms, having even been convicted for possession of a prohibited weapon. In other words, the suspect has an affinity for firearms, which for the German police confirms the veracity of the statements of the witnesses, Helgi and Manfred, since at Christian Bruckner's home, they claim to have found a firearm. This is very little, almost nothing, to assess the veracity of the testimonies and their credibility. So I really need, I can't even speak anymore. I really need to take like a 5 minutes break, guys. I'm gonna have some cold water from the fridge, some coffee, and yeah. So let's just take a 5 minutes break because I feel like I can't even read anymore. So I'll see you guys in five. Grab a coffee, grab some water, some tea, whatever, snacks, whatever. And I'll be back in five. Okay, guys, I'm back. So just a reminder, we are at page 120 out of 141. So there is not so much left now. Okay, let's carry on with the chapter number 37. Weak attempt to overcome the contradictions. As we can see, the German police tried to prove the veracity of the statements of the witnesses Helgi and Manfred by drawing parallels with the criminal record of Christian Bruckner, forgetting the witness credibility of each of them, their interests and motivations, and taking for granted that what they say is true because they have managed to draw parallels. I'm gonna make it a bit bigger. That's it. I should have done this from the beginning. In this line, everything these witnesses say is almost the absolute truth, and they manage to overcome the obvious contradictions between the two testimonies, turning the viewing of the same videos into surprisingly different crimes. The contradictions are obvious, but no attempt is made to find out why the differences manifest themselves. Thus, in addition to the crime of 2nd of September 2005, Christian Bruckner is also suspected of committing the following crimes. Rape of a woman aged 70 to 80 years old who spoke English with a British accent inside the tourist flat. Rape of a woman aged about 40 years who spoke Italian inside the suspect's home. Sexual attack of a German national aged between 14 and 16 inside the suspect's home. I think that this is the same 14-year-old that I mentioned. So you remember when I said that I was just reading today an article? Okay, anyway, it should be stressed that none of these alleged victims have been identified. The specific age of the German citizen is unknown, and above all, it has not been established whether the sexual relations were against the victim's will or by mutual consent, however shocking the violence used. In this context, it is not sufficient to conclude that the crime has been committed simply because the witness Manfred stated that he could distinguish between reality and staging as he was used to watching indecent films. In these films, staging can be understood as the use of actors, but reality is not synonymous with crime. It can be a mere home movie with the knowledge and the consent or not of both protagonists. The police consider the statements of the witnesses Helgi and Manfred to be credible. If this is so, if such statements serve to raise suspicions and to substantiate accusations, then the entire content of such statements must have the same relevance. The witness Manfred stated three things which were of interest for the investigation and which had to be verified. All of them cast doubt on the credibility of the witness Helgi, as it is alleged that this witness lied and concealed relevant information. The first question concerns the goods that were stolen from the house of Christian Bruckner. The testimony of Manfred is clear. In addition to the appropriation of the firearm and the videotapes, he clarified that they appropriated only a video camera. They stole drums of diesel oil, not 200 or 300 liters, which were stored in a warehouse. They stole a vehicle and its documents, which was sold in Santa Clara by Helgi. As to the fact that the witness Helgi was shocked by the viewing of the videotapes, which contained porn content and alleged acts of rape, the witness Manfred stated that despite Helgi's disturbance, he showed the films contained in the videotapes to a German, the owner of a bar near Santa Clara, who practiced Reiki therapy. As to the fate of the videotapes, Manfred confirmed that he left them inside Helgi's motorhome parked at the Rebel Farm in Santa Clara, but that he eventually sold the vehicle there. When Helgi gave evidence to the London Metropolitan Police on 8th of February 2018, he had already sold the motorhome many years ago. Despite this, he allegedly lied. He said that the videotapes were inside his motorhome, which he had left parked at Rebel Farm. Faced with these statements and obvious contradictions, the police had to verify their veracity. It would not be difficult to identify the vehicle stolen and sold in Santa Clara, as well as the identity of the buyer. The sale of the motorhome would also be easy to confirm and even to locate the vehicle. It could be the case that despite the years that have passed, the videotapes are still there. It should not be forgotten that, according to Manfred, the motorhome was sold to the owner of Rebel Farm. As for the contradictions between the two main witnesses, the German police did nothing, or rather believed too much in the statements of Helgi. By a European investigative decision, the Portuguese authorities were asked to search inside the motorhome to find and seize the famous videotapes stating that the vehicle was still owned by Helgi and that it was parked at the Fazenda Rebelde in Santa Clara. But the motorhome was not found there, nor did the owner of the space remember Helgi, even though, as Manfred claimed, he was the person who bought the motorhome. Helgi joked with the British and German police, but they don't seem to care. What they have to monitor is the veracity and credibility of Helgi's statements, so they cannot confirm Manfred's statements. For example, the German citizen, then owner of a bar in Santa Clara, and the Reiki therapist to whom Helgi showed the tapes stolen from Christian Bruckner's house was never identified and never bothered by the police. This testimony was important for two reasons. He could confirm or not the content of the videos, as well as say whether he recognized Christian Bruckner in the videos, whether he knew about the burglary in his house, and whether he confided in him. Once again, there seems to be a compelling reason why nothing has been done to locate, identify, and listen to the Reiki therapist. And we come back to the need to keep intact the veracity and credibility of Helgi's testimony, which cannot be shaken or questioned. We must not forget the main motive of this investigation. The icing on the cake is not the arrest and conviction of Christian Bruckner for the rape of an old woman, but his involvement in the abduction and murder of Madeleine Mccann. This would be the grand prize, the trophy of trophies. To achieve this goal, they need Helgi's untouchable testimony. At this point, it's important to recall, in the words of Helgi, the moment when the confession of Christian Bruckner took place. According to Helgi, after the robbery he committed in 2006 at Christian Bruckner's house, he only saw him again in 2008 during the Orgiva Kite Festival. At that time, he was afraid of him as he feared that he knew the identity of the perpetrators of the robbery. Despite the fact that Christian had already shown a lack of trust in him at the first and only meeting in 2006 in Portimao, Christian did not let Helgi know where his house was, and despite his fears, Christian did not show any signs of connection with the theft and confessed his involvement in the abduction and murder of Madeleine Mccann. At that time, and still today, the German community living in the Algarve Hills and in the area of Santa Clara, in Alentejo in particular, is very large, but is difficult not to be known in that environment. Christian Bruckner was certainly known in that area, and if one of his cars was sold there, or if a video cassette with porn content was seen by third parties in which he was the protagonist, they would come to know about it. It would be difficult for the theft to be kept secret from his co-perpetrators. The suspect, having knowledge of these facts, would easily find out the identity of the perpetrators of the theft, as he certainly did. The German police believe that he never knew the identity of the perpetrators of the burglary at his home, because in the text files Das Buch and Das Buch 1, he only refers to friends without indicating the names, and because in statements made in Germany in 2011 in the context of a criminal trial, he spoke of the burglary without mentioning the names of the perpetrators. In addition to the steps mentioned, others were not carried out. I have already mentioned one, the verification of the date on which the witness Christian P. went to the suspect's house when he was in prison in 2006 to pick up clothing and personal belongings there. Another step that remained to be taken was in relation to the girlfriend Marina. It was necessary to know whether she was living in the suspect's house in 2006, as well as to clarify when she became aware of the robbery committed by the witnesses Helgi and Manfred. When we read the statements of the victims of the 2005 crime, we get the idea that the perpetrator of the crime was a person with little knowledge of the Portuguese language. It is a public and well-known fact that the suspect, Christian Bruckner, a German citizen, had been living in Portugal for more than 10 years at the time. It takes a decade to learn to read and speak a language such as Portuguese. In view of this, it was necessary to carry out an investigation with friends and acquaintances in order to find out the suspect's linguistic knowledge of Portuguese. In view of the victim's written statement that she could see the dark eyes of the assailant, even though he was masked, it would have been interesting if the victim had been shown a photograph of the masked suspect with the eyes highlighted. The German police merely showed the victim a simple photo of a black mask found and seized in one of the searches of Christian Bruckner's property. The German police forgot to take important steps to uncover the material truth, but apparently had the cunning to use an undercover agent. It is said that sometime after Christian Bruckner's arrest and following his extradition from Italy in 2018, he shared a cell with a person who was reportedly being held for crimes committed against minors. The conversations that this prisoner was trying to have with Christian Bruckner were related to practices to dispose of a corpse. After a few days, one night, the prisoner was taken out of the cell to be treated in hospital. He never returned to prison. Chapter number 38, Advertising and Propaganda, Selling the Monster. And I think this is one of the most important steps. When companies and organizations want to promote products, services, and ideas in order to convince the public to buy them, they resort to advertising, a form of communication. But if the idea is to spread thoughts and theories, to spread thoughts and doctrines, then propaganda is the communication tool they use. Throughout recent history, there are examples of propaganda that are the subject of study, such as N propaganda, developed by Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda of the N government in Germany. We can also mention the propaganda of the Estado Novo during the Salazar dictatorship through the Secretariat of National Propaganda, directed by Antonio Ferro, or the American propaganda that encouraged military recruitment. Propaganda aims to attract followers or influence people's attitudes with the ultimate goal of convincing the public to adopt a certain attitude or adhere to a particular group or belief. Advertising and propaganda are different, but are similar in that the latter, the propaganda, uses the same multimedia formats as advertising. Propaganda aims to change the public's attitudes towards a particular person or issue. At the beginning of June 2020, the English, German, and Portuguese consortium, Grange, Reckon, and Associados, launched a large propaganda campaign with the clear intention of convincing the public of certain aspects related to the mysterious disappearance of the British girl, the parents, the investigation, and the suspect. At first glance, this is nothing new or unexpected. The year before, a big press conference was planned at which the consortium would announce to the world the resolution of the case. My intervention, alerting that the suspect was, for that illustrious group of investigators, another German PDF, delayed the start of the propaganda campaign. As I said, this is not a new campaign. Since the disappearance alert, the parents have launched an identical campaign with the intention, in their own words, of cleaning up their image and, in the words of their communicator, producing positive things. They used media agencies to change public opinion about them and to sell the abduction hypothesis as a commercial product. The British police, as seen in 2013, even used a British TV channel to campaign for the parents of the missing child and their abduction theory, using the figure of the public appeal and citizen collaboration in the identification of persons of interest. This technique had already been used by the parents to give credibility to their investigation and their theories about the abduction, while feeding the media with their ideas and suspicions, producing positive news. The Portuguese have followed suit. limiting themselves to press releases saying they are investigating in cooperation with international law enforcement authorities without publicly committing themselves to possible suspects. But they continue to feed the news. For some, the novelty is the role of the German police, who are not doing propaganda alone, but have a German state prosecutor by their side who, using a shock strategy, announces to the world that the person responsible for the abduction is a German PDF and that the child is dead without presenting any solid proof of evidence. Another novelty is that this time the feeding to the media has been reinforced not only with reference to the abduction theory and the identification of a perpetrator or merely suspect, but with almost everything in the investigation produced by the consortium. We say almost everything because, for example, the existing contradictions and the missing investigation steps, which were voluntarily left aside, forgotten as if they were unimportant, were hidden from the grid of the newspapers and TV channels. This manipulative strategy paid off, and the so-called investigative journalism reproduced and presented the product in the desired way. Once again, the public appeal technique of cooperation was used to convince the public. Nobody questioned the information that was provided for days and months, especially the so-called information journalists, many of whom invoked the so-called German rigor to protect themselves from any setbacks. The appeal to German rigor was a way of lending credibility to the consortium's research. Journalists were thus an instrument used to disseminate distorted facts and sell the product produced by the consortium as advertisers or mere propaganda organs. We heard several times that the suspect was a PDF with several convictions for child SA, but there was no one to explain the type of abuse and the correct number of convictions. It is one thing to produce sexually suggestive photos of children. It's quite another to have sex with children. Another example of the exploitation of journalists was the message that Christian Bruckner from an institution in São Bartolomeu de Messins received from children to abuse them in exchange for electrical appliances, when it's clear from the German investigation that this does not correspond to the truth. It is known that he was a criminal and a drug addict, someone who, with the strong motivation of regaining his freedom, deceived the investigators of the Grange, Reckon and Associados consortium, but not a single journalist has questioned the credibility and motivation of such an individual. Being a journalist is much more than writing what is dictated. To be a journalist is, in the words of Jorge Calmon, former Brazilian journalist, state deputy for the Constitution, Secretary of Interior and Justice, Professor Emeritus at the Federal University of Bahia, and member of the Bahia Academy of Letters, to be the depository of the contract that society made with a private institution, the press, to protect the public interest, to supervise governments, to denounce abuses, to call against violence, to protect freedoms, to advocate for the unprotected, to watch over the law. As for duties, let's look at what the Code of Ethics of Journalists says, which is quite clear. The journalist must report the facts with vigor and accuracy. The distinction between news and opinion must be clear in the eyes of the public. And as for the so-called investigative journalism, it's good not to forget that normally its function will be to unveil mysteries and facts linked to crimes, so that some investigative action is expected from the journalist, for example, receiving information and making it known. Ipsis verbis does not seem to be investigation. Faced with this professional reality, one would expect objective work that would question the various information they received from the consortium, Grange, Reckon, and Associados, in order to produce news other than the dissemination of misleading advertising and manipulative propaganda. Journalists were expected to be true professionals and not mere vehicles of information. There were cases where large amounts of public money were used to produce misleading, subjective, and purely advertising reports, where we were even called liars. Such was the need to serve the parents of the missing child. We keep forgetting the maxim that when denouncing or censoring, you can't have a straw tale because it exposes you to justified discredit. There is a big difference between being an exempt journalist and an opinion journalist motivated by personal interests. The start of the propaganda began with the press conference of the head of the Grange operation, from which it was claimed that the alleged abductor resembled the father of the missing child, which is nothing new. Since 2013, the English police had come to this conclusion. In 2019, during an interview for a Spanish TV channel, when I was shown the photograph of the PDF murderer Martin Ney as a likely suspect under investigation by the German police, I replied that this was not the individual and added, "That doesn't even look like the father of the child." The response to my statement now came via the British police officer, accompanied by images of a suspect, two Portuguese mobile phone numbers, who had a 30-minute conversation, a conversation said to have taken place next to the Ocean Club an hour and a half before the child's parents and friends had dinner, and photos of a motorhome and a Jaguar belonging to the suspect. Hey, Suni, thank you so much for joining. Suni is saying, thank you for your amazing work. Did the tapas friends have children of their own in the resort rooms that night? According to what they said, yes. And according to what they said, they were taking it in turns, watching the children, if we are to believe the timeline that they say, and watching the children, which I don't believe it. Sony is also saying, if they had kids in the rooms, why were they not concerned for their safety? I think it's a sign that they knew there was no danger. They knew there was not an abduction. To be honest, I don't even think that they were checking on the children. And I think that the whole timeline and the whole checking on the children, the idea came afterwards, after reporting Madeleine as missing, because they needed to say something. And why I'm saying this is because they came up with 3 different timelines. I mean, if you have a rotating plan to check on all the children, you don't need 3 different timelines after the fact. You know, I think that one timeline, or at least a timetable, would be sufficient without any need for changing details because it doesn't quite match the previous timeline or whatever else, you know. The German police and prosecutor took the same tone as the British, adding that they had evidence of the child's death, something that didn't satisfy the parents, hypothesizing that this death was the result of bloodshed following the fatal discharge of a firearm, and creating the idea that Christian Bruckner was the PDF abductor so desired by the children's parents, despite there being no proof or evidence. What this German prosecutor says is quite intriguing and contradictory. The strongest statement is that they have material evidence that the child is dead, and that they also have a lot of evidence that she was murdered by Christian Bruckner. Then he says that they are only putting together a puzzle because pieces are missing to prove definitely that Christian Bruckner was responsible for the death. From this statement, it can be concluded that the prosecutor is not telling the truth, and that after all, they do not have much evidence that the child was killed by Christian Bruckner. If they had any evidence, they would have already charged and convicted him, from which it can be concluded that they have no evidence of anything, only their desire to incriminate the suspect. Even so, the prosecutor goes on to say that there are many pieces that lead one to believe that the suspect is the perpetrator. That is all a thought, a mere idea. To reinforce this thought, the prosecutor makes another improper disclosure: the fact that the suspect's mobile phone was detected in the tower in the Ocean Club area. If the suspect's mobile phone number is not known, how can such a statement be made? On the other hand, as the suspect lives a few kilometers from Praia da Luz, it would be normal for his mobile phone to use one of the antennas in that area So that in itself proves nothing. To give credibility to such evidence, the prosecutor also says that they went to talk to the media because not only is it a possibility, but they would not take away the parents' hope that she might be alive, or possibly they would be diverting the course of the investigation. This is another falsehood. The main reason for the propaganda campaign is to sell the consortium's research. The possibility that the girl's parents are responsible for her disappearance is completely ruled out by the German investigation, stating that according to our investigation, there are no indications that the parents are connected to the disappearance. And again, I'm asking myself here, how can a police force from a different country who just became involved, not even in the investigation into the disappearance of Madeleine Mccann, but whatever they want to achieve with Christian Bruckner, how can they say with certainty that the parents are not connected to the disappearance of Madeleine Mccann when Madeleine Mccann vanished in Portugal? And there was a Portuguese investigation, and those officers involved in the investigation are the best officers to say about the investigation in their own country, not a police force like Germany, who jumped in a couple of years later just for the sake of naming a suspect, linked to Madeleine McCann's disappearance. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. And for people who believe it, I don't know what's in their head. I don't know what they are thinking about. I don't know. So let me just carry on here. Whoever asked him this question was already expecting this answer. If the investigation focuses on an alleged PDF, there can be no suspicions about the parents or any other person responsible for her care. This is the so-called La Police truth, so obvious as to be ridiculous. I very much doubt that this prosecutor has read the Portuguese files of the investigation of the disappearance, because he doesn't need to read it to create a PDF suspect, and in this case of German nationality, which is even better as he has the competence to interfere in the Portuguese investigation. That's clever. That's how the German police got involved. That's very clever. Because the suspect is German. So they can get involved in the investigation if they come up with a suspect linked to Madeleine McCann's disappearance who is German. Something is going on here politically, I think, between the UK, Germany, the US, and it seems Portugal as well, after Goncalo Amaral was made to leave the investigation, or lost his job or whatever. Something is going on there. Something is going on here. Something really, really, I think it's more than we can even imagine. So I'm going to carry on with what Goncalo Amaral is writing. I think the missing piece is one or two hairs found in the flat from where the child disappeared. Perhaps in this way he could place the suspect in that place, but there are many hairs, and the one found on one of the sheets of the victim's bed in 2005 is already enough. The judicial police cannot collaborate with this kind of thing and renounce their competence and that of the Portuguese labs. A German prosecutor commenting on a Portuguese criminal investigation is abnormal. I would like to see and hear a Portuguese prosecutor commenting on the German investigation. The independence and objectivity of journalists was put to the test, and one of the first things that many Portuguese, English, Spanish, German, and other nationalities did was try to get my opinion. There were many requests for interviews. I didn't respond to these calls for several reasons. The first was that I didn't want to participate in this media circus, where my voice would only serve for all kinds of speculations and even to give credibility to the news contained in the propaganda. Another reason is that the error on which the public appeal was based was out in the open. A current image of a man who was said to have committed a crime 13 years earlier. and who surprisingly even resembled one of the 2007 composite robot portraits. The subjectivity and self-interest of some journalists was so evident that they could not let these contradictions pass without questioning those responsible for the revelations. On the other hand, letting them speak is a way of witnessing monumental contagions. The accuracy of the Germans would be called into question. Only almost a month after the start of the propaganda campaign did I decide to react. In between, I had lunch with my friend and colleague Tavares de Almeida. It had been a long time since we had been together, and inevitably the campaign was a topic of conversation. The place chosen was the restaurant Obeiral, very close to the TV station, where supposedly investigative reports on the case were being broadcast. Our lunch alone would have made the news, but the investigative journalists did not come to eat at this restaurant this time. Between some nicely roasted and appetizing pieces of suckling pig, accompanied by a white murganheira, half dry and half fresh, we kept the conversation up to date. Like me, Vitor Tavares de Almeida has been watching the development of the campaign and, like me, says that there are things that raise doubts in his mind. They show photos of a suspect with a real image. That's fooling the papalvos. They could have found a photo of the suspect closer to the event if he was arrested in 2006. There is a photo of him entering prison. What kind of investigators? They forget essential details. They don't even know what to do. Another forgotten detail. If that's all, the photos of the motorhome were manipulated. When he left Portugal for Germany, it looked like this. This motorhome, with or without pictures, could not go unnoticed in Praia da Luz. It's the German rigor, the outdated and misleading photos, and the manipulation of images. I confess to Vitor that I am a bit fed up with the way the suspect is being sold and that I intend to give an interview to the newspaper of the place where I was born, the Jornal do Centro in Viseu. My idea of giving an interview to a regional newspaper, apart from being a way of supporting the regional press to the detriment of the more important national or international media, is also intended as a white glove slap in the face of the acceptance of the food coming from the consortium by these important newspapers and TV channels. At this point, Vitor was ironic and stressed. When you are hungry, anything will do. The English and the Germans know how to use the media to get their ideas across, no matter how absurd they are. As for the idea of giving an interview to a regional newspaper, Vitor thinks it is too little. For him, he should divide the topics and start with national TV. It's agreed that I will contact the journalist José Alberto Carvalho, whom I think is a good and impartial professional. I jokingly tell Vitor that this journalist is even from Viseu. After the interview with José Alberto Carvalho, in which I reveal the manipulation of the photos of the motorhome and warn that the image of any person changes over the years, I turn to the city of Viseu. The origins of this city, capital of the Beira Alta, go back to antiquity, with Viseu being strongly associated with Viriato, a Lusitanian hero who, in the middle of the 2nd century before Christ, fought against the expansion of Rome in Hispania. His guiding values were the protection of the homeland and the struggle for political freedom. He was defeated and killed in an act of treason by companions bribed by Rome. Many other important figures were born in Viseu, such as the leading name in 15th century Portuguese painting known as Grão Vasco, whose work can be seen in the museum that bears his name. Located in the Paço dos Três Escaiolhos, next to the cathedral, in the heart of the historic center. On the eve of the interview with the Jornal do Centro, those responsible for the propaganda campaign reacted and published a new image of the suspect, a barely legible photocopy of the prison photo. They understood the message but did not have the courage to be rigorous, allowing comparisons to continue to be made with a robot portrait of a man seen in Praia da Luz, whose description does not correspond at all to the suspect. Nor did they have the courage to say that in May 2007, the suspect had shoulder-length hair. The consortium strategy is clear. They have to get the message across that this is the suspect. despite the fact that there is no evidence, no clues, and especially because he doesn't match any of the sketches and doesn't resemble the father of the missing girl, as the British police wanted. Most of the journalists who tacitly agreed to join the propaganda campaign ate and kept quiet, or rather didn't know how to ask. References to the 2005 crime, the rape of an elderly American woman in Praia da Luz, were ridiculously used as proof that the suspect was a PDF. Everything was exposed. That victim no longer had the right to anonymity and her privacy was violated. To some, it mattered little. It was proof that the suspect had committed a barbaric crime in the same locality from which the British girl disappeared. I don't know if journalists had access to all the documentation in that case, because if so, there was a lot to question. But there must have been good management of the leak. Sunu is saying, I wish we knew more about the friends. Besides being doctors, what is their backgrounds? Are there any Freemasons in the group? Well, allegedly, apparently, Jerry Mccann is a Freemason. Carl is saying the fact that Kate left the twins alone again while she went for help says it all. Exactly. Bernadette is saying, and there is no evidence that CB is connected to the disappearance either, as sick as he is. Yes, as sick as he is. I'm not saying that he's not sick. You know, he's doing. He did his horrible crimes, which are just completely disgusting. But as we can see, there is absolutely no evidence, not even circumstantial evidence, that Christian Bruckner had anything to do with the disappearance of Madeleine Mccann. It's just that all of these things are on purpose being hidden from the general public in the media. Canada. So where is everyone watching from? I have here Canada, Scotland, England. Do I have America as well? Okay, let me carry on. Journalists only knew what was of interest for the construction of a suspect. The conclusion is obvious. Most of the national and international media were manipulated. If they had had access to all the documentation of the German investigation, I have no doubt that they would have asked the right questions and helped to clarify the intentions and motives of the propaganda campaign. When I arrived in Viseu on 23rd of June 2020, I met Antonio Figueiredo, a journalist from Jornal do Centro. I thank him for his willingness to interview me, and I'm available for any questions he wants to ask, as long as they do not go into my private life. The highlight of the interview was the exhibition of the suspect's photo, the real one, and not the photocopy taken in 2006 when he entered Portimao prison. From Viseu, a regional newspaper broadcast to the world the clues about the mysterious disappearance and the alleged kidnapper. After the television projection via the internet, I sent a copy of the recording to all the journalists who had contacted me at the beginning of the propaganda campaign. Now, all that remained was to get back to writing and finish the book I had been writing since 2009. At the insistence of friends, I also took part in a TV interview on a Portuguese channel in which I expressed my conviction that the Portuguese Judicial Police, Public Prosecutor's Office, and labs have the competence and capacity to investigate the case with the collaboration of foreign authorities, but never depending on them. After 30 minutes, tired of hearing about the German suspect, I interrupted the interview, asking the journalist why we have been talking about the suspect for so long if we don't even know the victim. This kind of investigation has to start from the knowledge of the victim, and the victim is not known at all. For example, the medical history is missing, which was hidden from the investigation. After almost 14 years, we still don't know the victim. That's the reality. While I was writing this book, I kept hearing other barbarities. Now there is another case. A 10-year-old girl, Joanna Eltz, says that on 7th of April 2007, on Salema Beach, the German suspect masturbated in front of her. For some, this is proof that on the eve of the British girl's disappearance, a few kilometers from the Ocean Club, the suspect was active. But active in what? Abducting young children, indecent acts, masturbating? Does the suspect, the Christian Bruckner depicted in the photos, in no way correspond to who he was in April or May 2007? It is said that at the time of the complaint in April 2007, the police made a sketch of the person described by Joanna Eltz. The judicial police has not made any such sketch. As for the Garda Nazionale Republicana, the authority that would have received the complaint, I doubt that they have done so, but there could always be a member of that police force with a knack for sketching. This case worries me. Once again, the Portuguese judicial police and judicial authorities seem to abdicate their competence and responsibilities in favor of the German state. This is wrong and of dubious legality. The consortium's propaganda campaign seems to have achieved its objectives of selling to the general public through the media. Its investigation, however, is very, very badly stitched. Chapter 39. An incomplete investigation and not completed. Contrary to what the parents of the missing child would have us believe, no complementary investigation has been carried out to the one completed by the police report of September 2007, drawn up by Chief Inspector Tavares de Almeida. At the moment, the investigation is at the same point where it was then. What happened in the following months was a bad arrangement of the case with a view to its closure, nothing more than that. This tidying up of the process is evident in the kind of measures taken, namely the reinterrogation of witnesses in order to undermine their testimonies through non-existent doubts or by devaluing the testimonies. Take the case of Martin Smith's family with the establishment of fragile limits to the chronology of the facts, the lack of in-depth study of the clues and evidence, inquiries that were not carried out, expert examinations whose results, even just the type of information, were not explored and confirmed. The reenactment of the case was ineffective, as all witnesses and suspects were expected to participate in the reenactment. In view of the witnesses' refusal to participate, the defendants were not allowed to conduct the reenactment. A letter rogatory to the United Kingdom a few days before the closure of the case only served to say that the process had been carried out without going deeper and exploring the possible results with further interviews, which were necessary in view of the content of some of the statements made in the context of this letter. With the closure of the criminal case, what resulted was an inconclusive investigation. With the reopening of the criminal case and the investigation, there was only one direction: the construction of an alleged PDF. If the doubts persist and the conclusions contained in the British profiler's report are still valid, the two main priorities are disappearance with possible responsibility of the relatives or the intervention of a sexually motivated third party. In my opinion, the evidence existing in September 2007, which pointed to the accidental death of the child and the subsequent concealment of the body, remains valid and will remain so until the investigation manages to conclude otherwise, which, until the closure of the criminal case, has not happened. The disappearance of the responsibility of a third party for sexual reasons in the circumstances in which it occurred is a more far-fetched hypothesis. It enters the realm of speculation and doesn't answer all the questions. If we look at the content of the above-mentioned profiler's report, drawn up on 1st of June 2007, to which we have already referred, we can see how many speculative elements must be used to prioritize this hypothesis. We believe that the way in which Madeleine's disappearance is recorded in the UK is the most correct one. A mere disappearance and not a child abduction, because there is no evidence that this happened. It was the archiving of the case that allowed doubts to remain and, in a way, gave rise to the most diverse speculations. But this act of archiving also allowed the child's parents to continue with a campaign to publicize the case while attacking the national institutions and the police officers involved in the investigations as if they were to blame for the disappearance. The end result of the closure was the impossibility of finding the material truth and bringing justice. The only way to put an end to this state of affairs is to read the criminal case file. Today, I have serious doubts that those responsible for it, whether in the judicial police or in the public prosecutor's office, have read it in its entirety. The investigation should be restarted at the point where it was in September 2007, which would allow for a thorough review of the investigation, which can and should include all the reports produced by the various private detectives who worked on behalf of the parents of the mysteriously missing child. The scenario used in 2007, a disappearance alert at 10 o'clock in the evening on 3rd of May, and 2 sightings should be reconsidered, and the hypothesis that the child had died before that day should be raised. The range of days to be analyzed begins on 29th of April, when, by means of a photo, they want us to believe that the child went to the swimming pool with his father and brother. All of the consequences and repercussions must be reviewed within the framework of the investigation carried out and to be carried out. We should not exclude the possibility that something serious may have happened on the night of 1st of May 2007, when the child was shouting for her parents for more than an hour. We must not forget that this crime took place in Portugal. The Portuguese police and judicial authorities are responsible for investigating it. It's true that this investigation can and must be carried out within a framework of international cooperation, but it's the English who must cooperate with us. It's the Portuguese who are responsible for leading the investigation. I say the English, ignoring the Germans, because they have absolutely nothing to do with the investigation into Madeleine's disappearance. All the suspicions they have created are just that, created, fabricated, and fictitious suspicions. As we are aware of the investigation and what remains to be done, we suggest a series of steps, the result of which will contribute to uncovering the material truth and help to dispel the main doubts. When did the child die? What happened on the night of 3rd of May 2007? What happened to Madeleine, and where is she? Who is responsible for her disappearance? Reconstructing the facts is an urgent priority. We analyze the behavior and actions of the various witnesses and parties involved. If it's impossible to carry out this task with all the friends of the missing child's parents, it's still interesting to carry it out with just the 2 parents, as some of the contradictions contained in their testimonies can be clarified without the intervention of other people. As an example, I will mention one detail. The girl's mother says that she looked for her daughter under all the beds. The truth is that these were sommiers, which are only a few centimeters above the floor, and it was impossible for the girl to hide there. Another interesting detail was to check the lighting conditions in the room and what the mother did in relation to the window, whether she opened or closed it. As well as these, there are other elements that can be clarified through the reconstruction, which can be carried out only with a couple if the friends refuse, but ideally it should be done with a group of 9 adults. I believe that the reconstruction will demonstrate the absence of a surveillance plan. The main reason for absence from the table was the need to go to the toilet to urinate. The security scheme will have been deliberately produced to make the children feel safe and to deceive the police. Many of the subsequent steps to be taken will depend on this, and it will be of interest to the investigation and to the parents themselves, who will have the opportunity to have their actions that night clarified, which may dispel the halo of doubt that hangs over their behavior. They should not be afraid, but cooperate with the justice system, because if they really have nothing to do with their daughter's disappearance, their participation in this process will help to clarify the facts and may be favorable to them. Nothing could be simpler. You just have to be willing to cooperate and cooperate. Other investigative steps are necessary, namely, the incorporation into the case file and the analysis of the book Madeleine, written by the mother of the missing girl, in which the facts are intentionally distorted and lied about with the clear intention of dispelling any suspicions about the parents and friends. This book should be treated as a document of evidence. The indispensable access by the Portuguese police investigators and their subsequent analysis to all the reports drawn up by the various private detectives hired by the parents of the missing child, as well as to the contracts signed between them and the child's parents. The continued monitoring of PDF websites on the internet and the re-examination of the list of PDFs used at the beginning of the investigation and subsequent editions. The setting up of a special team to review all Madeleine sightings, assessing their credibility and origin, and with a view to establishing the causes of these sightings, clarifying whether any were created on purpose and by whom. The search for and questioning of the Polish couple, who at the time were reported to have photographed girls identical to Madeleine on a beach in the Lagos area. The location and interrogation of the suspects in the burglaries of flats in and around the Ocean Club. Several suspects were named at the time, but we believe that more is now known about the perpetrators of these robberies. One of the suspects is German citizen Christian Bruckner and his friend Michael T., who should be questioned by the Portuguese police. The interrogation of the German PDF murderer Martin Ney, arrested in Germany, to find out where he was when the child disappeared. In order to establish the credibility of the witness, Helgi, in the German investigation, the following steps should be taken. A request for information from the Greek prison and judicial authorities on the visits and contacts made to and from prison by the prisoner Helgi, and to find out the circumstances of his early conditional release. Requesting information from the Greek authorities in relation to the meeting in 2017 in Athens between Helgi and members of the British police, which may have taken place in a hotel. Examining the witnesses of the German investigation, namely Helgi, Manfred, and Christian. Interviewing the German citizen Nicole F., who in 2006 was responsible for a children's home in São Bartolomeu de Messins in the Algarve, and questioning the owner of Fazenda Rebelde in Santa Clara about the acquisition of Helgi's motorhome and its destination. Identification, location, and interrogation of a German Reiki therapist who in 2006 owned a bar in Santa Clara to whom Helgi showed films of Christian Bruckner's rapes. Identification, location, and interrogation of the German citizen Uwe, who in 2006 lived with Manfred and Helgi in Santa Clara. Identification, location, and interrogation of Christian Bruckner's girlfriend, who in March 2008 accompanied him on a trip to Orgiva in Spain. Identification and location of the car stolen by Helgi from Christian Bruckner's house and sold in Santa Clara. Identification, location, and inquisition of Christian Bruckner's girlfriend, a German national in May 2007, now 41 years old, who left Portugal via Faro Airport on 10th of May 2007, where she was arrested for being in possession of a gas pistol to find out where Christian Bruckner was on the night of 3rd of May 2007. This woman will never have been heard by any police officer. To ascertain the fate of Madeleine McCann's pink blanket, to trace and confiscate it for forensic examination. Its non-existence must be seen in the context of the child's mysterious disappearance and the explanations given in the meantime by the parents. Confirmation of the exact time the alarm was raised prior to the GNR call by records of calls made to the mobile phones of the Ocean Club staff and management, including the mobile phones of the nursery teachers who attended the flat. Records of calls made from the landline phone installed at Pamela's home. Reconstruct the route taken by Jeremy from the time he left his flat to walk and put his infant son to sleep until he returned in order to determine the time spent. Reconstruct the route taken by a man with a child on his lap, leaving the flat of the missing child up to the time and place he was seen by the family of Martin Smith. This reconstruction should take into account the route Jane Tanner claims he took and the more practical and logical route, leaving the flat walking in the opposite direction to that claimed by Jane Tanner. The timing of both routes, a man of the same physical stature as described should be used, and the child of the same age, size, and weight as Madeleine should be carried in the manner described by Jane Tanner and the manner described by Martin Smith's family. Tasmin Smith testified that on two separate occasions, on 30th of April 2007 at 8 and on 2nd of May at 12:25, 12:28, he saw a man, calm, ostensibly looking at the balcony of the flat from which the child had disappeared. Analysis of mobile phone traffic on those dates in the periods from 7 to 9 and from 11 to 1, respectively, to check if any relative of the missing child made or received any phone call or message on those occasions, and if any mobile number is repeated in those periods of time. The recognition by the family of Martin Smith of the full-length portrait of the man with the child on his lap, seen by Jane Tanner, drawn from her description, as well as the recognition of the photo of the father of the missing child, where he appears dressed in the same manner. Location of the flat opposite the cemetery in Praia da Luz, where the parents of the missing child reportedly went at night following the missing persons alert with identification and inquiry of the inhabitants at that time. Investigating the circumstances surrounding the theft of the missing girl's father's wallet at London airport on his first trip after the disappearance. The father claimed that his credit cards had been stolen, with particular attention to the use of these credit cards in the months prior to the events. A formal request that the UK authorities be informed of the outcome of any investigation they may have carried out into the complaint lodged on 16th of May 2007 by Catherine G. and her husband concerning obscene and sexually suggestive gestures made by David Payne on the island of Mallorca in September 2007 towards Madeleine. Clarification once and for all by the British authorities on the relationship of David Payne with the activity of the Social Security technician Yvonne, when he states that he was already known to her and that it occurred within the scope of his professional activity without remembering whether as a witness or as a suspect, and whether there is any information in the UK linking David Payne to PDF. Recognition of David Payne by Carol, Pamela's niece, who claims to have seen a man in the courtyard of the house where the child lives during the morning or afternoon of 3rd of May 2007. The description given of this man matches that of David Payne, and it's normal that this individual was there as a friend of the couple. The recognition by Jeremy of Jane Tanner, as there are strong indications that this is the woman dressed in purple who on the evening of 3rd of May 2007 was outside one of the flats inhabited by the friends of the parents of the missing child smoking. You should indicate the specific location where this person was. The formal request to the British authorities, namely, to provide the investigation with all the images, photos or videos taken by the British tourists during their holiday in Praia da Luz, which have been provided to that police force on the grounds that they may contain elements relevant to the investigation. The handing over of the telephone recordings made and established between the British police and the parents of the missing child. Access to the information that someone had seen the father of the missing child on the beach on the night of 3rd of May 2007 with the identification of the witness and his interrogation. Providing all the information and documentation that led them to debug the sighting of the man with the child on his lap, as well as the identification of the mysterious man who, 6 years later, came to say that he was the one carrying their daughter, having kept the child's pajamas and his own clothing despite the years that had passed. Information on the identities of the witnesses whose testimonies led to the construction of the composite sketches published in October 2013 by Andy Redwood, head of the Grange operation. Obtain copies of all documentation relating to his investigations into the disappearance, in particular the so-called Grange operation. Excuse me. Investigate the work carried out by the British lab, the full record of the work carried out by the forensic scientists, contained in the notes taken at the time of the examinations. These notes are available in the lab for review if necessary. Analysis of all records of telephone calls made and received, as well as text messages sent by the parents and the child's group of friends between the period of 29th of April 2007 until the parents returned to the UK, with a particular focus on the period 29th of April to 4th of May. Analysis of all records of calls made and received, as well as messages written by relatives and friends of the missing child's parents who accompanied them to the Algarve between the period from 4th of May 2007 until their return to the UK, with verification of mobile phone locations in order to determine any anomalous behavior in that period. Particular attention should be paid to Michael, the husband of a cousin of the child's mother, who may have played a role far beyond mere support for the child's parents. An analysis should be made of his stays in Portugal, with particular attention to the periods when the parents of the missing child were absent. Particular attention should be paid to the time when the children were baptized in the UK. The communications established through their mobile phones during the periods when they were in Portugal should also be analyzed, as well as the preparations for the plane journey, in order to know whether they were made in time or at the last minute. Examination of all records of calls made and received, as well as messages written by Katrina, an employee of the Ocean Club Nursery during the period from 29th of April to 4th of May 2007, who is said to be a friend of a daughter of the godfather of the missing child. Ascertain the true motive and connection, as well as the possible support provided by the owner of the Villa Mora bar. The parents of the missing girl always claimed not to know anyone in the Algarve prior to their daughter's disappearance. However, in the early hours of 4th of May, the mother received 2 phone calls from the owner of a bar in Villa Mora, 100 kilometers from Praia da Luz. This individual would state that the parents' relatives and his acquaintances from that bar asked him to call to offer his services and that he did nothing else. As for this phone call, it's possible that it was not made by the owner of the bar, but by someone who does not wish to be identified and who therefore used a strange phone, a technique used by intelligent people. Verification of the weather conditions at Praia da Luz at 10 p.m. on 3rd of May 2007 and on 29th of April, photograph of the swimming pool. Although an official request was made in this regard, the information was not provided because the police decided not to pay the requested amount, deciding to file the case without this important information. To find out how many funerals of British women were held in the Church of Light in June and July 2007, whose bodies were cremated in Ferreira do Alentejo, it has been reported that in the middle of the night, 3 figures were seen entering the church through a side door carrying a heavy sports bag. At the time of this event, the urn of a British subject was inside the church. We should explore the possibility that the body of the missing child was placed inside the urn under the body of the British subject. There will be a witness who witnessed it from his house nearby who will have to be located, identified, and questioned. So guys, these are not just rumors going around. Even Goncalo Amaral suspects that it's possible that they could have possibly get rid of Madeleine McCann's body in a sports bag at church, with the remains being placed inside the urn under the body of the British subject. And the heavy sports bag, does he mean the blue tennis bag by any chance? Because that blue tennis bag was seen and then it disappeared. Could it be that even the bag was cremated, if we entertain this theory? And that's why it was nowhere to be seen after? Okay, let me carry on. Find out the formalities of cremating corpses and check whether the body of a child, about 90 centimeters long and weighing 30 kilograms, can be hidden in an urn under the corpse of an adult woman. Consultation of the Portuguese Medical Association on the use of a medicine called Calpol. Is it a paracetamol, as the mother claims, or can it be used as an antihistamine? Request the cooperation of the parents in order to access the missing child's medical records. The coloboma of the iris that the child appeared to have could be related to heart problems. Gather all available information on the routine use of the drug Calpol to put British children to sleep. Further questioning of parents and friends in the light of the new facts resulting from the enforcement of the 2008 rogatory letter, as well as the contents of the child's mother's book, and the strong suspicion that they had all lied about the existence of a plan to monitor children sleeping over in the flats. The members of the group should describe the clothes they were wearing on the night of 3rd of May 2007. Diane, mother of Fiona Payne, should confirm whether or not, following the missing person alert, she went to the table at the tapas restaurant to retrieve her purse and the camera from the parents of the missing girl and clarify whether or not photographs were taken with that camera on that night. Susan, wife of Anglican priest Haynes, who came to replace Father David, visited the children's parents on 4th of May. The child's mother claims to be Catholic and to want the spiritual support of a Catholic priest, as she even writes in her manuscript. But 3 days later, Susan arrived in Praia-da-Luz. Suddenly, Susan replaced Father David and his wife Pam and became the main support of the child's parents. As for the support given to the parents, where did Haynes and Susan live? Was the trip to Praia-da-Luz already booked in time? What things were planned for their arrival? All this because in 2008, when the mother of the missing girl visited Canada to visit an aunt, allegedly Aunt Nora, it became clear that Susan could be an acquaintance or neighbor of that relative. It is urgent to proceed with her investigation. Aunt Nora arrived in Praia-da-Luz on 4th of May before the new Anglican priest and his wife, so it's important to analyze the communications established through her mobile phone to find out whether she contacted the said priest or his wife, Susan, before her trip and with what intentions. To clarify the hasty exchange of Anglican priests at the time of the disappearance, it's important to question Father David and his wife, Pam. Catriona, a former employee of the Ocean Club nursery, due to her statements to various media and her relationship with the parents of the missing child, has become a suspect in a possible cover-up of the disappearance and must be questioned to clear up any doubts. Julian, in his case, should be questioned to find out the circumstances under which in 2013 he contacted the British police claiming to be the man cited by Jane. What mobile number was he using at the time? What are the mobile phone numbers of his wife and other family members who may have accompanied them on their holiday? What is the period of time he was in Praia-da-Luz? What is the name of the nursery where he says he went to pick up his daughter? At the daycare center where Julian picked up his daughter, access the children's check-in, check-out records, as well as confirm the night service. With the mobile phone numbers of Julian and the other members of the family, it's possible to trace the mobile phone on 3rd of May 2007. It should not be forgotten that the judicial police have all the traffic records of the mobile phone antennas in the Praia-da-Luz area. As far as Julian, a doctor, is concerned, we should not rule out the possibility that he and or his wife or a relative know the parents and friends of the missing child, most of whom are also doctors, so it's important to investigate the existence of any kind of relationship. The coincidence of the description of a suspicious man in the statements of Nuno, Jane, and the Smith family leads to the suspicion that there may have been some kind of collusion to produce this coinciding description. It's important to question Nuno to clarify the motive for such statements. It's important to remember that Nuno's daughter was the same as the missing girl and that the description of the man who was seen photographing her matches that of the father of the missing girl. Type of clothing. Yvonne, a British social services technician, is to be questioned again about her recognition of David Payne and about any contact or pressure she may have suffered after her statement was made public. On 4th of May, according to her manuscript, the mother was concerned about this witness having written. Also, SW, Yvonne, a bit upset, worried, as she did not know who he was, intentions, overbearing. This concern was growing. The mother tried to find out from the Portuguese police whether she had already been questioned, and she also wrote, The concern about this witness seemed serious because she wrote, Yvonne called Angela twice while we were in the car. After 15 minutes, the policeman, driver of the vehicle, and we received a call from the PJ saying we had to go back, but we were not told why. Without knowing the reason for the return or the link to witness Yvonne's phone call, the mother has since claimed that those moments were terrifying. Jeremy is to be questioned about the contacts and pressure he may have been subjected to after his statement was made public, as well as the description of the clothes the child's father was wearing on the night of the disappearance. Don't forget that they spent a few minutes talking in the street. Martin Smith's family, the Irish, should be questioned again to find out what contacts and pressures they may have been under after their statements were made public. Catherine, her husband Savio, and the other persons who in 2005 spent a holiday with the parents of the missing girl on the Spanish island of Mallorca should be questioned about the facts related by this witness, which concerns David Payne. Lindsay and Richard were then living in the Ocean Club flat G4L and had dinner at the tapas restaurant on the evening of 3rd of May 2007. It's necessary to find out if they have photos of the dinner and if they remember the clothing worn by any of the members of the parents' group. It's also important to confirm the time they arrived at the restaurant, the time they stayed there, and the time they realized that the group had left. It's also essential to find out how they found out about these times. They claim to have left the restaurant at 9:30 p.m. and not to have seen anyone strange in the vicinity. The owner of a Lagos pizzeria, British-born George, who claimed to have seen a man with a child on his lap, and a woman in the early hours of 4th of May near the Lagos Marina, must also be questioned to describe the people and the child he saw. The various detectives involved in the investigation of the mysterious disappearance in the absence of the Criminal Investigation Department, namely Ken Farrow and Michael Keenan, investigators from Control Risks, David Edgar and Arthur Cowley, managers and employees of Metodo 3, the company hired by the girl's parents, should be questioned. The people who gave the descriptions of the suspects, whose sketches were made by the private detective agencies hired by the parents, should be re-interviewed. Medical experts who can give their opinion on the reasons for the deep sleep of the twin brothers, which arouses suspicion as they didn't wake up at the time of their sister's disappearance alert, nor with the noise that settled in the house, the mother having spent the night monitoring their breathing. The undertakers should clarify the formalities of cremating corpses and should make a statement on the possibility of hiding the body of a child in the urn containing the body of an adult woman. Here, the testimony of the technicians of the funeral parlors identified as having provided the funeral service for the British women, with subsequent cremation in Ferreira do Alentejo from the Church of Light in June and July. That a formal request be made to the German authorities for all information and documentation relating to the investigation into the disappearance and suspicions concerning Christian Bruckner, in particular everything produced in the context of the Recon operation. In addition to the above-mentioned interrogations, the judicial police will also hear statements from John Short, a Scotland Yard officer who allegedly passed on information about a request for Madeleine's abduction by a Belgian PDF network in order to understand how he acquired and gave credibility to this information. The British police technicians should be identified. They went to Praia da Luz to monitor the mobile communication antenna on the site, which at the time had already been carried out by the Portuguese police. The technical means used and the possibility that this means interfered with the time recording of these antennas and why they didn't seek authorization from the Portuguese police and judicial authorities are being investigated. Bob Small and Prior Stewart, British police detectives, and other members of the British police force who accompanied the investigations in Portugal, including the expert who worked with the British dogs. The former is known to have hypothesized a homicide. Andy Redwood, British police officer and member of Operation Grange, one of those responsible for the vetting of the Jane Tanner sighting. Luis Neves, National Director of the Judicial Police. Paolo Rebello, Senior Coordinator of the Judicial Police. Myself, Tavares de Almeida, Chief Inspector, and the other elements of the Judicial Police who participated in the investigations will be heard. Forensic examinations. The hair with the same coloring as Madeleine, found in the boot of the car rented by her parents 20 days after the disappearance, was sent to a competent lab. Although the FSS, the English lab, declared that it was impossible to establish a DNA profile of this hair because it has no roots, there are European labs with the necessary technique to carry out such a DNA search. We examine all the hairs found inside the flat from which the child disappeared to define and compare the DNA, entering the profiles in a database. At no time should the judicial police and the public prosecutor's office allow these tests to be carried out outside Portugal. Our labs have the appropriate and sufficient technology to carry out this type of examination. Examination of the photo of the swimming pool showing the father with the missing child and the brother to determine if it is a photomontage. Send the photo of the child with tennis balls to the National Institute of Forensic Medicine so that the medical experts can give their opinion on the stain on the child's forearm. They should be asked about the normal causes of the injury, whether it's a hematoma or a sunburn, as the mother claims. They should also check whether it is a photomontage. Check the records of the daycare center, in particular the signatures relating to the entry and exit of the missing child. After locating the pink blanket, a lab examines it to confirm that it belongs to Madeleine through DNA testing. This blanket should also be subjected to further tests to detect any traces of fluid that could shed light on her consumption of any antihistamine, Calpol or other. In addition to all these measures, the judicial police and the public prosecutor's office should act to clarify what we consider to be an abnormal coincidence. At 3 different times, by as many witnesses, Nuno, Jane, and the family of Martin Smith, in 3 different places, and at 3 different times, but on 2 different days, a man is described in the same way, with the same type of clothing, and not looking like a tourist. The witnesses do not know each other, but the description of the man matches. Furthermore, the description provided by these 3 witnesses matches the physical description and type of clothing worn at the time by the father of the child, and Martin Smith's family even recognized the man as his possible father. In addition to the measures listed above and others that may be necessary, the judicial police should suggest to the State Attorney General's office to open an investigation to investigate the discrepancy between 2 white sheets collected from the 2005 crime victim's house and handed over in 2018 to the German police. This, upon entering the German lab, became a white sheet plus duvet, and upon examination, white sheet plus curtain. The chain of evidence may not have been safeguarded. And I think that in this chapter, this is what Goncalo Amaral is saying, that it should be done in terms of the investigation. But there are a lot of things which he points out which they need to be done, but honestly, I'm not so sure if they will ever be done. Chapter 40, which I assume is the last chapter, considering I'm at page 138 out of 141. By way of a final conclusion, this book was written over the last 12 years. Here I narrate the consequences and the harmlessness of the search for the child. Alongside this narrative, there is a review of the Portuguese process in which the child's disappearance was investigated and which is still to be investigated, the investigative methodologies that were adopted, the steps taken, the provisional conclusions reached in September 2007, the conclusions contained in the behavioral report on the profile of a suspect, the timeline, and the window of opportunity. We got to know the girl a little better, specifically through the vocabulary she uses. At the time of the disappearance, she seemed to denote some speech impediment for a 4-year-old, an idea that was rejected by the mother, who described her as very intelligent and articulate, considering that the vocabulary used by the daughter was not limited and would be above the usual usage of other children of the same age. It is not known what is essential, whether she was abused, as the episode in Mallorca described by Dr. Catherine when she reported the suggestive gestures of David Payne seems to denote. The review of the work carried out by the judicial police is carried out over the years. interspersing the approaches of the different hypotheses from abduction, planned abduction, abduction motivated by sexual gratification, voluntary disappearance, the responsibility of the parents or other persons with the duty to take care of the child, accidental death with or without the ingestion of the drug alcohol, death in the hours of days prior to the alert of disappearance. The behavioral report drawn up on 1st of June 2007 by the British agency MPIA, which after profiling a possible abductor, draws attention to the fact that the possible involvement of the family in the disappearance of the child cannot be ruled out. For the experts who drafted the report, there was no evidence at the time to directly support the family's involvement. But given the absence of decisive evidence to the contrary, this hypothesis had to be explored in addition to the alternatives. For the first time, the risk control report produced in the first days after the disappearance, the work of the private detectives hired by the parents, and the review of the child's mother's book, which is evidence to be attached to the file, were reviewed. This review began with a scenario presented on 3rd of May 2007, a disappearance between 5:30 and 10 o'clock, with the subsequent alert of a child to be watched in a sketch drawn up by parents and friends, and 2 sightings of a man with a child on his lap, one by her friend Jane at around 21:15, and the other by the family of Martin Smith after 22. The re-examination of the investigation showed that there had been no surveillance plan and that the eventual death of the child could have occurred at an earlier time, taking into account the date of 30th of April. Photograph of the child in the swimming pool with her father and brother, or the night of 1st of May, when the child spent more than 1 hour and 45 minutes crying alone with her 2 brothers. Since the night of 3rd of May, the only thing that can be assured within the group of parents is the non-existence of a monitoring scheme for the children. As far as the alert of the disappearance is concerned, it's not known if it was planned or if it corresponds to reality. The exact time remains to be determined, knowing only that the telephone call to the Republican National Guard to warn of the disappearance occurred at 22:41. As for the initial search for the child following the alert carried out by friends and locals, all that is known is that they were only looking for a missing child and not for a man with a child in his arms. They were not looking for a child following an abduction. Jane Tanner's statement about seeing a man with a child on his lap has always been suspect because it has been refined over hours, days, months, and years, as well as casting doubt on witness Matthew Oldfield's statement about going to the flat where the child disappeared. This is the reason why the British police in 2013 proceeded to expunge this sighting, made intentionally, being aware of its inconvenience. All that remains is the sighting of Martin Smith's family, who partially recognized the father and the missing child, which has led the same police to consider that the abductor resembles the child's father. As for the man with the child on his lap, namely in terms of the way he walks and dresses without looking like a tourist, there is a strange coincidence. The testimonies of 3 independent witnesses seem to describe the same person who resembles the father of the child. The analysis of the elaboration of the police sketches outside the criminal proceedings and without the presence of the judicial police shows that they are used to impose the idea that the child has been abducted, drawing attention to the fact that any sketch should be drawn up on the basis of a statement describing the person portrayed, a description that can and should serve to eliminate or confirm the resemblance between the sketch and the person finally identified. On the other hand, the temporality in which the testimony is produced, as well as the making of the sketch portrait, must always be kept in mind by those analyzing the resemblance. It's often not possible to know whether the witness is identifying the person he or she actually saw in the commission of the crime, or the portrait of the person he or she saw in the media. Finally, in any resource for the identification of a person or persons, photos or images contemporary to the crime should be used, not before or after, as people change with age. Having had access to the documents relating to the investigations carried out by the police and the German authorities, it has become clear that they have a common thread, which starts from the premise of the existence of a kidnapping by PDF, with no other means of proof than the motivated statements of a prisoner sentenced to more than 7 years in a Greek prison for trafficking in human beings. He is the one who claims to have heard that Christian Bruckner was responsible for the abduction. The investigation into Christian Bruckner has not produced any evidence or clues pointing to his responsibility for the abduction, nor has it even succeeded in proving that this individual is a dangerous PDF murderer, despite the massive propaganda campaign carried out since June 2020. That investigation is flawed by several errors and omissions of important steps to uncover the truth. As a US federal judge recently said in relation to an error-ridden false allegation of voter fraud, it's like Frankenstein's monster. It was stitched together haphazardly. I don't even know what that word means. This comparison is perfectly apt to define the German investigation. A suspect was constructed without even proving the existence of a kidnapping. On the other hand, the simulation of a kidnapping that took place on 3rd of May 2007 is not compatible with the existence of a real kidnapping. If there had been a real kidnapping, why simulate it? Today, we know a lot about the suspect, whether real or fake, but little, if anything, about the victim. It's to be hoped that with the publication of this book and the knowledge of the errors contained in the German investigation, so-called investigative journalism will assume its intervening role and question why such a poor job has been done by the German police and authorities, whose intervention in the investigation of Madeleine's disappearance alone proves nothing. The main conclusion reached by our review of the investigation is that there are still many unanswered questions, the only certainty being that on the night of 3rd of May 2007, after 10 o'clock, a British child of approximately 4 years of age was reported missing. Another certainty is that the child traveled to Praia but is not known specifically when she was no longer seen outside the family or group of friends, and if she died when and in what circumstances. The provisional findings contained in the interim report produced by the Judicial Police in September 2007 remain valid, and no evidence has been gathered to invalidate them. 14 years after the disappearance, after millions of pounds and euros spent, the investigation continues where it left off in 2007. All hypotheses are open. After reviewing the Portuguese investigation and analyzing the work of the consortium Grange, Reckon and Associados, a set of useful steps towards the material truth has been listed, some of which may already have been carried out, but I believe most will come as a surprise to many. The first step will be to reconstitute the events that took place during the dinner on 3rd of May 2007 with the 9 adults who made up the holiday group. The Portuguese authorities cannot abdicate their powers and responsibilities. The crime of 3rd of May 2007, whatever it was, took place on national territory. From the outset, criminal proceedings have been the competence of the Judicial Police and the Public Prosecutor's Office. The investigation must be carried out within the scope of the facts contained in such criminal proceedings and can and should be carried out in collaboration with other countries, but is the Portuguese police and judicial authorities who are in charge of the investigation. The contrary is not acceptable and would be of dubious legality. The child who mysteriously disappeared deserves an objective and serious investigation and not a randomly stitched, badly stitched monster. South Olivais, 1st of February 2021. And guys, this is the end of the book. So, what do we think? It seems that even Goncalo Amaral is, what word can I use here? Speculating, or maybe he's of the opinion that it's very much possible Madeleine Mccann died before the 3rd of May and died before she was reported missing. And a lot of things that were written in his book, there are things which we already said as well, that that could be the case. So it's kind of like a confirmation from an investigator in this case. Okay, guys, so you remember when I said, when I started reading from the first part of this book, I said that the PDF version of the book in English was given to me by Ola. It was sent to my email address. Okay, so Ola has been following the lives, and she sent me another email and she told me where she got the book from. So if you guys are interested, she told me where she got the book from, and I think that's the reason why, because I said I'm not allowed to share it with you because I didn't get any kind of, you know, permission to do that. So she told me that she got the book, this book, which I just finished reading, from a Facebook group, which is called What Really Happened to Madeleine McCann, which I think I am a part of, or I have been a part of that Facebook group until a lot of bullying happened and stuff like that. And so I left. Did I leave? I can't remember for sure if I did leave or not, but yeah, I know I was part of that group. But anyway, again, I'm going to say the group's name is What Really Happened to Madeleine McCann. As far as I'm aware, you cannot access any posts in the group unless you join. So this was posted on 23rd of September 2022, and it was published by Sue Hovel with thanks to Christine Booth. Ola doesn't know from the translation or if it was, you know, made online or with AI technology or whatever, but it doesn't matter anyway if it was translated using AI or somebody translated. It was a good translation anyway, and yeah, and it took a long time anyway for this translation. Last. So guys, if you are interested, if you are sorry, excuse me, I'm losing my voice now. It's been what, since 10 o'clock? Yeah, oh my god, it's 1:20. Wow. Okay. So I'm going to tell you now, again, I'm going to be repeating that Facebook group if you want to have a copy of the book, What Really Happened to Madeleine McCann. That's the name of the group. But I think that you do need to join and you need to be a member so you can access the posts on there, on that group. And a couple more minutes, guys. I'm going to give you some time to write any comments that you have before I end this live. It's been a very long one. Wow. I didn't expect it to be this long. But thank you so much for everyone who joined. And thank you so much for everyone who watched all the lives. And thank you to everyone who is watching my channel. Suni is saying, thank you, Kat, for sharing tonight. I'm so happy I found you. I'll be waiting for your next one, Okay, Suni, thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure having everybody here. Okay, guys, I'm going to end the live now because it's very late. You guys probably want to go to sleep as well. Take care, guys. Have a great weekend, and I shall see you in the next one. Hey, Jackie, thank you. Thanks for being here. Take care, guys. Chumba, yes. Let's see here. Chumba is saying I'm on a theory of the church. I agree with that. it's very much possible, and it's also plausible. And then he also goes with the blue tennis bag and with the mysterious disappearance of the blue tennis bag. Now it's here, now it's not. Okay, guys, good night, everyone. Good night, and I will see you in the next one. Have a lovely weekend and take care. Bye.